Hi guys. Tonight we are going to slip into a moment that might make you shiver before you even tuck in under your own blanket. Imagine yourself trudging through the mire of a battlefield camp sometime around the year 1350. The sky is black as pitch, the moon blurred behind smoke, and the air stings your cheeks until you can't quite feel them anymore. You duck through the flap of a soldier's canvas tent, and the first thing that greets you is not warmth, not comfort, but a breath of air that feels barely softer than the wind outside. Cold mud clings to your boots, and the canvas walls sag inward with droplets of condensation that might as well be icicles. You glance around and wonder, honestly, how anyone managed to get through a night like this without freezing to death. And here's the reality check. You probably wouldn't survive it, not with your 21st century habits and central heating. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, leave a comment telling me where you are in the world and what time it is right now. I love to see who's drifting to sleep across the globe at the same moment. Now, dim the lights. Let's slip further into the mud and canvas. The tent you're in is a simple contraption. 4 rough poles lashed together, the whole thing smelling like wet wool, smoke, and sweat. No fire crackles inside, it's too dangerous. The risk of the whole thing going up in flames far too high. Instead, the warmth, if you can call it that, comes from the bodies crammed shoulder to shoulder, exhaling steam into the heavy air. This is your home for the night, and though you know dawn will bring another day of marching or fighting, for now, the challenge is just surviving until the sun rises. One mainstream fact stands out here. Medieval armies rarely fought major campaigns in the depths of winter, precisely because this nightly ordeal was too difficult. Chroniclers noted that campaigns often wound down in late autumn, resuming only with spring thaws. Yet, as you shiver here, you know that sieges, the drawn-out strangulations of castles or towns, could not be so conveniently scheduled. Armies might linger for months in hostile territory, weather be damned. You picture frost creeping across the ground, soldiers coughing into their hands, praying their breath won't crystallize into one last gasp. Now, for a quirky tidbit, there are records of soldiers attempting to waterproof their tents with a mixture of animal fat and even, bizarrely, fermented fish oil. Imagine lying beneath a canvas that reeks of rotting herring, but repels a bit of rain better smelly than soaked, or so the logic went. You might laugh at the thought of the stench, but when survival is on the line, even bad smells become oddly tolerable. Still, scholars continue to debate whether these tents were issued uniformly or cobbled together by whatever soldiers could scavenge. Some historians argue that royal armies, especially those of France or England, provided standardized tents for their men, built to collapse and be carried on carts. Others suggest that only officers had such luxuries, while common infantry curled up beneath whatever tarp or cloak they could scrape together. The truth probably lay somewhere in between, shifting with wealth, leadership, and sheer luck. You lie down now, stretching onto the frozen ground, and the first thing you notice is the seep of moisture crawling into your bones. No matter how you shift, the damp earth pulls at you like a hungry ghost. The canvas above you flaps in the wind, a mournful percussion that feels like it's mocking your shivers. Sleep will not come easily tonight. Your fellow soldiers murmur in the darkness, trading curses at the weather and muttered prayers for safety. One snores already, his breath rattling like a bellows, while another pulls his cloak tighter, muttering about the foolishness of fighting in such cold. You realize that in this darkness, even the enemy seems less terrifying than the numbness creeping into your fingers. There is a curious detail you can almost taste in the air, the mingled odor of damp wool, old straw, and bodies that haven't bathed in weeks. For a moment, you picture your own modern bed, the fresh sheets, the heater humming softly, and you understand why chroniclers describe tents like these as a living grave. It isn't death by sword or arrow that frightens you most here. It's the quiet possibility of simply never waking because your body could no longer keep itself warm. A rat scurries past your hand, bold as you are still. Vermin thrived in these camps, feeding off scraps and crawling into bedding to steal crumbs or warmth. One soldier swats at it lazily, too tired to care, too weary to chase it off. The little creature disappears into the shadows, reminding you that life in camp is a hierarchy of endurance, from rats to men. Your thoughts wander to the officers' tents somewhere nearby. Bigger, heavier pavilions propped up with ropes and poles, sometimes even lined with rugs stolen from wealthy houses. You resent the thought of them sipping warm wine while you huddle here in the dark. Yet even for them, comfort was relative. Many still woke to frozen beards and stiff joints, their finery doing little against the clawing cold of medieval nights. As the hours pass, you hear the canvas strain under the weight of frost, the tiny pops of ice forming on the seams. Your back aches, your toes throb, and you realize why so many soldiers wrote songs, whispered jokes, or sang bawdy ballads at night. Distraction was sometimes the only blanket they had. You hum softly to yourself, the tune trembling in your chest, and you sense the others listening, grateful for anything that might keep them awake just a little longer before the plunge into uneasy dreams. And so you close your eyes in that tent, feeling the rough canvas walls sagging, hearing the night crack with frost outside, smelling the blend of wool, smoke, and humanity. You know you'll wake to another day, if you wake at all, with ice crusting your lashes and the march calling you onward. The tent does not promise safety, but it is the only barrier between you and the elements. You wake with a stiff groan, but instead of leaving the cold behind, you discover the chill has crept into your bones like an unwelcome tenant. The canvas above your head is slick with condensation, dripping faintly onto your cheek, and you swipe it away only to smear mud into your beard. It's still night outside, judging by the hush. The stars remain smothered behind a blanket of fog, and you roll onto your side, fumbling with the wool cloak that is your one true ally against this gnawing freeze. Wool. Scratchy, coarse, often pungent from lanolin and sweat, but the miracle material of medieval survival. You feel its weight pressing down, not soft and comforting like your modern fleece blanket, but stubborn, rough, and heavy. Soldiers prized it because even wet it could hold warmth, trapping pockets of air close to the skin. That's the mainstream fact you notice in the dimness. Cloaks, tunics, and even tent walls stitched from wool gave medieval armies their best chance of enduring icy nights. Chronicles of the 100 Years' War describe men layering cloaks upon cloaks, wrapping their legs in strips, and sometimes even using the garments as extra padding beneath them on the frozen ground. Of course, there were quirks too. Did you know that some troops, desperate for insulation, lined their wool with horsehair? You picture it half cloak, half mane, a garment that smelled like stable muck but supposedly trapped an extra layer of air. Not exactly haute couture, but when your choices are freezing or looking ridiculous, well, pride has a way of bowing to survival. Imagine strutting into camp, wrapped in what looks like an unshaven pony, yet everyone envies your warmth. Scholars remain divided on just how effective these layers were when compared with furs or hides. Some argue that wool provided unmatched resilience in damp weather. Others insist fur held more heat. There's still no clear consensus, and you can practically hear the voices of historians debating over their cups of coffee, or maybe mulled wine while you lie here in your cloak that feels both miraculous and maddening. The itch of the fibers against your neck is constant, like being nibbled by invisible ants. You tug the cloak higher, fold it beneath your head, and realize that medieval soldiers often had to repurpose garments for tasks they were never designed to do. Cloaks doubled as bedding, as makeshift pillows, sometimes even as stretchers when carrying the wounded. Tonight, yours is all of the above. Mattress, blanket, shield against the draft slinking through the cracks of the tent. As you lie still, you notice how the men around you shift and grumble in their own nests of wool. One man mutters about his toes, another about the ache in his back. A third has his cloak pulled so tightly around him he looks like a giant cocoon, his breath puffing steadily into the folds. The sound is oddly comforting, like a chorus of moths tucked into cocoons. You realize that warmth was not just about material, but also about morale, knowing that everyone else is enduring the same itch, the same smell, the same scratchy embrace of wool. You take a slow breath and inhale the peculiar cocktail of scents that come with wool cloaks: damp lanolin, smoke from last night's campfire, a lingering note of wet dog. Not romantic, perhaps, but grounding. These are the smells that tether you to the reality of camp life. Modern people rave about scented candles and diffusers. Here, your diffuser is a soldier who hasn't washed in a month. There's another curious thought that flits through your tired mind: the color of your cloak. For common soldiers, wool cloaks were rarely dyed. Natural browns and greys were the default, though officers might sport brighter shades, dyed with madder root or woad. Yet those dyes were not just vanity, they helped keep rank visible even at night. You can imagine yourself peering across a dark tent and spotting a flash of red, knowing it belonged to a captain or knight, while you huddle in your humble grey cocoon. The debate continues in your thoughts. How much of this wool was issued, and how much was brought from home? Some accounts hint at armies supplying cloaks as part of a soldier's kit, but others suggest that men brought whatever they could afford. If you were poor, your cloak might be a family hand-me-down, patched with leather, moth-eaten but still clinging to usefulness. If you were wealthy, perhaps your cloak was lined with fur, stitched by a skilled hand, and the envy of your comrades. The contrast reminds you that even in survival, social rank pressed heavily on the cold. You pull the wool tighter and roll onto your side, trying to imagine the mental tricks soldiers played to endure. Perhaps some counted breaths, focusing on the rhythm of inhale and exhale. Others might whisper verses or prayers, steadying their minds against the relentless gnaw of the cold. And you, lying here centuries later in your imagination, find yourself muttering that you'd trade 1,000 cloaks for one radiator. Yet, you drift in and out of shallow dozes, waking each time your body twitches with cold. The wool cloak scratches your chin as you turn, the damp creeping steadily into the fabric, but still it does its job. You are not warm, but you are not frozen. You hover in that delicate balance between misery and survival, and somehow you understand why generations of soldiers swore by wool as their most faithful companion. When at last the faintest light creeps through the canvas seams, you tug the cloak over your head to shield your eyes. Morning frost will be waiting, and so will the march. But for now, for just one last stolen moment, you burrow into the itchy embrace of wool and pretend you might sleep a little longer. You are still wrapped in your stubborn wool, but now the tent feels smaller, tighter, as though the canvas has drawn closer overnight. In truth, nothing has shrunk except the distance between you and the men packed around you. That is the other great secret of medieval survival: body heat. The human furnace, inefficient alone but strangely powerful when multiplied. You find yourself wedged between two other soldiers, shoulders touching, knees colliding, all of you tangled in cloaks and muttered complaints. This is not a matter of preference. It is necessity. You may joke about personal space in your modern life, but here in the camp, huddling is the difference between waking stiff and waking dead. Soldiers knew it instinctively: crowd together, share warmth, and endure. Chroniclers describe ranks of men sleeping like stacked logs, bodies pressed so closely that when one shifted, the entire row shifted with him. That's the mainstream fact tonight. Survival often depended less on equipment and more on companionship. And yet, there are strange, almost comic footnotes to this practice. A quirky tidbit survives in anecdotes. Sometimes soldiers would deliberately sleep in alternating directions, so heads and feet interlocked like crooked puzzle pieces. Why? To avoid endless complaints about bad breath. You laugh quietly in your corner of the tent, imagining rows of stinking boots at face level. Perhaps not much better, but at least no one's snoring directly into your ear. Historians are not entirely agreed on how common this arrangement was. Some argue that descriptions of men sleeping like fish in a barrel were metaphorical exaggerations, not literal rows. Others insist archaeological evidence of long communal pits with traces of bedding suggests it really happened. The debate lingers, unresolved, but you don't need a dissertation, you only need to feel the weight of another man's elbow digging into your ribs to know closeness was inescapable. As the night deepens, you notice how warmth spreads unevenly. The men in the middle, where you happen to be, are sweltering compared to those on the edges. You almost sweat beneath your cloak, while the poor souls near the drafty canvas mutter about frozen ears. This is the strange democracy of cold. Someone will always pay the higher price. And yet, no one volunteers for the edge unless commanded. The middle spots are coveted real estate, sometimes reserved for veterans or favorites. You wonder whether soldiers ever bribed their way inward with a promise of bread or wine. The air grows heavy, thick with the sound of breathing. Dozens of lungs pumping together create a rhythm that is almost hypnotic. You find yourself swaying in time, lulled by the shared exhalations. But the smell, oh, the smell reminds you that intimacy comes with attacks. Wool, smoke, unwashed flesh, and the sour tang of wine stew together in this confined bubble. You wrinkle your nose but accept it. After all, this odor is proof that the tent is full, that you are not alone, and that your collective heat may just see you through until morning. There is a curious moment when you shift and your hand brushes the shoulder of the soldier next to you. He does not flinch. In fact, he leans a little closer, murmuring some half prayer, half lullaby. This intimacy is not about friendship or comfort. It is about survival. The tent strips away modesty and privacy, leaving only raw necessity. You imagine yourself back home, explaining to friends that the only thing between you and hypothermia was the shoulder of a man you barely knew. They would laugh. Here, no one laughs. Here, no one survives alone. Another soldier mutters in his sleep, jerks upright, then settles again, disturbing the delicate balance of the row. A ripple travels down the line as men adjust cloaks and positions. You sigh, realizing that even sleep is communal, negotiated moment by moment. Rest is fragile in this world, constantly interrupted by coughs, snores, or the restless shiver of someone fighting back the cold. You notice that some of the men clutch their weapons even in slumber. Swords or spears pressed against their sides, daggers beneath cloaks. Perhaps it is habit, or fear, or simply that the weapons make convenient bedfellows when there is no space left. Yet this too adds warmth. The cold steel pressed against a leg absorbs some heat, though not without risk. More than one tale survives of men waking with a burn-like chill mark from metal left too long against their skin. The hours drag. You drift into shallow dreams where you march endlessly but never grow warm. Each time you stir, you are reminded of the closeness of others, their heat, their weight, their uninvited intimacy. Yet strangely, this becomes a comfort. The cold gnaws less fiercely when you are part of the pack. You feel it in your bones. Humanity has always survived by huddling. Even in Stone Age caves, people press together by firelight. Here, the tradition continues beneath sagging canvas. A rat scuttles overhead, its claws scratching faintly against the canvas. No one moves. The heat is too precious to break, and you all remain in your row, listening. It is a strange thing to realize that the rodent has more freedom than you do. It can scamper into the night while you lie pinned by necessity. You close your eyes again, pushing past the itch of wool, the rank of sweat, the chorus of snores. Instead, you focus on the warmth, steady, communal, undeniable. You are not comfortable, but you are alive, and for a soldier in a medieval tent, that was sometimes the greatest triumph of all. The ground beneath you feels harder with every passing hour, as if the earth itself is intent on swallowing what little heat remains in your body. It is then that you realize why soldiers prized straw as dearly as they did. The cold does not just come from the air. It seeps up from the ground, creeping through your boots, through your cloak, and into your bones. To fight that invisible thief, armies spread layers of straw beneath their bedding, creating a fragile cushion between flesh and frozen soil. This was no luxury, this was a mainstream fact of medieval campaigns. Chronicles of sieges from France to the Holy Land mention soldiers foraging for straw not only to feed animals but also to keep themselves alive. A thick layer could transform the worst tent into something almost tolerable, though by tolerable, you mean merely less agonizing than bare earth. You stretch out now, your cloak scratching your chin, but beneath your back you feel the faint crunch of straw, brittle stalks pressing into you like 1,000 tiny quills. It's not comfortable, but it is essential. And of course, the practice gave rise to quirks. One odd tidbit: some soldiers swore by stuffing their boots with straw overnight, claiming it kept their toes from freezing off. Imagine pulling on your boots in the morning, only to find them bursting with dry stalks, sticking out between seams like tufts of hair. You picture men marching away with little golden whiskers sprouting from their heels, and you can't help but smile through the discomfort. Practical? Yes. Stylish? Not in the least. Still, scholars are uncertain whether all armies relied on straw bedding or only those who could spare the resource. Was it standard issue, carted along in wagons, or scavenged from nearby villages at the cost of angry farmers? Some argue that well-supplied forces like the French crown distributed it regularly, while others suggest common infantry had to scrounge whatever they could steal. The historical record remains fuzzy, and in that uncertainty lies the image of you crawling out into the dark to beg, borrow, or pilfer enough straw just to make it through the night. You shift, and the straw crackles beneath you, releasing a faint, sweet smell that carries memories of fields in warmer months. The irony is cruel, you smell summer even as your fingers ache with cold. Yet that scent is a comfort, a reminder that life persists beyond this frozen misery. For a brief moment, you pretend you are lying in a barn rather than a battlefield, that your enemies are just shadows rather than men sharpening swords in the distance. The sound of shifting straw fills the tent as others adjust their bedding. It rustles like whispers, a chorus of dry stalks. One soldier curses as the straw pricks through his cloak, another laughs quietly, saying it feels like sleeping on porcupines. And still, despite the jokes, no one discards it, because without it, the earth itself will steal their warmth, and there is no bargaining with frozen soil. Some men grow restless, tugging their cloaks tighter and complaining that the straw has grown damp. And there lies the flaw. Straw is only as good as it is dry. Once soaked with rain or snowmelt, it becomes a sponge, sapping heat faster than bare ground. You imagine waking in a puddle of mush, your straw mattress transformed into a freezing swamp, and suddenly you understand why soldiers guarded their bedding like treasure. Dry straw was a currency of survival, hoarded, traded, even stolen. Your eyes wander to the seams of the tent, where frost has crept down like lace. The straw muffles the ground's bite, but the air still nips cruelly at your nose. You curl tighter, drawing your cloak around you, feeling the stalks crunch beneath your hips. They dig into you in uneven lumps, some sharp, some soft, but you decide you'd rather endure a few scratches than the icy embrace of earth. One soldier near you mutters that he once saw men in Spain weaving mats from straw, rolling them up like primitive sleeping bags. Another scoffs, saying mats would never survive a damp northern winter. And just like that, the campfire debates of scholars echo in your ears through the voices of weary soldiers. What works in one climate may fail in another. It's a timeless argument, ingenuity versus environment. And so, in this tent, you resign yourself to the prickling, itchy mattress beneath you. You let the straw scratch your skin and rattle in your ears, because those brittle stalks are all that stand between you and the grasp of frozen earth. You close your eyes, whispering thanks to a farmer you'll never meet, whose harvest leftovers became your salvation. And with that, you drift into another uneasy slumber, cushioned not by luxury but by the stubborn resilience of straw. You stir awake again, this time coughing at the acrid tang that sneaks under the tent flap. Smoke, sharp and biting, curling into your throat until your eyes water. For a moment you panic as the tent caught fire, but then you remember. The flames are just outside, set deliberately at the entrance. A small blaze, shielded by stones or a shallow pit, meant to throw heat inward while keeping the worst of the sparks out. This is a balancing act medieval armies knew too well. Fire brought warmth, but fire also brought risk. Chronicles of winter campaigns note more than one disaster where a careless ember transformed canvas camps into blazing infernos. That's your mainstream fact here. Tents and fire lived in uneasy partnership, each soldier weighing comfort against catastrophe. You picture the scene, flames licking at the air, soldiers crouched near the opening, their faces glowing red while their backs remain frozen in shadow. It is survival by compromise, a smoky gamble played every night. And yet, quirks abounded. There are accounts of men burying smouldering logs just beneath the surface of the soil inside tents, hoping the gentle warmth would rise through the earth. Imagine it. You lie down on what feels like a heated floor, smugly warm, only to wake to smoke, choking your lungs or worse, your cloak smouldering at the edges. Not exactly the sort of camp innovation that won awards. But desperation breeds odd solutions, and some of them worked at least long enough to inspire others to try. Still, historians debate whether these fires were common practice or rare exceptions. Some argue that the dangers were so obvious that soldiers mostly avoided bringing flame near canvas at all. Others counter that without fire, freezing nights would have culled armies too quickly, so the risk was simply unavoidable. The truth likely varied, depending on supplies, climate, and the level of discipline among the troops. One commander might ban fires outright, while another turned a blind eye as long as his men could still march come dawn. You crawl closer to the tent flap, peering at the blaze outside. Sparks jump upward into the dark sky, tiny stars against the void. The heat brushes your face, warm enough to make you sigh with relief, but not strong enough to reach your feet. You notice how the men nearest the opening dominate the warmth, their boots stretched toward the fire, their laughter louder than the hiss of wood. Those farther back shift restlessly, wrapped tight in cloaks, muttering about the unfairness of it all. Even here, fire creates hierarchy. Your throat scratches from the smoke, and you can almost taste the bitter resin of half-burned pine. It clings to your tongue, invades your nostrils, leaves you blinking. You realize that every soldier in this camp will wake tomorrow with eyes rimmed red, coughing as though ill. Yet still, no one abandons the fire. Discomfort is preferable to frostbite. One man near you tells a story of a camp in Burgundy where the commander's pavilion went up in flames, consuming precious maps and banners. Another interrupts with a joke about roasted sausages and commanders who finally cooked for their men. The laughter ripples through the group, a fragile defense against fear. Because deep down, every soldier knows he is sleeping in a tinderbox. The fire itself becomes a kind of ritual. Men gather around it before bedding down, warming hands, sharing news, singing crude verses. Then, when the flames shrink, they retreat into their tents, carrying the fading memory of warmth like a talisman. You picture it now. Dozens of little fires scattered across the camp, glowing like embers in a vast field of darkness. From above, the army would look like a constellation laid across the earth. As you pull back into the tent, the air grows colder again, the warmth replaced by the damp chill of breath and canvas. The smell of smoke lingers in your cloak, clinging like perfume, a scent both comforting and suffocating. You cough once more, then lie back down on your prickly straw, aware that every soldier here has made the same silent calculation: better to risk fire than to die quietly of cold. The crackle outside fades to a soft hiss, the fire shrinking as wood turns to ash. You close your eyes, imagining the last sparks glowing red, then grey, then gone. And in that fading warmth, you feel both grateful and uneasy, knowing the fire is both savior and executioner, friend and enemy. The fire at the entrance has dwindled to ash, leaving behind nothing but smoke that clings to your cloak. You cough softly, roll to one side, and notice a faint red glow deeper inside the tent. At first you think your eyes are playing tricks, but then you catch the dull shine of coals in a shallow metal pan, a brazier, small, portable, and glowing like a heart in the darkness. This is the soldier's other trick against the night. Braziers filled with charcoal or wood embers, carried into tents for just enough warmth to ward off death. Not enough to make things cozy, but enough to take the edge off frost. That's the mainstream fact here. Portable braziers were common in both noble pavilions and, when supplies allowed, the humbler quarters of the rank and file. They were part of camp life across Europe, mentioned in chronicles, painted in manuscripts, and unearthed in soot-stained fragments by archaeologists. You edge closer to the faint glow, letting the warmth touch your knees. It's pitiful compared to a roaring hearth, but when you've been shivering for hours, even the smallest ember feels like heaven. The brazier radiates in silence, glowing red at its heart, ringed with grey ash. You hold your hands above it, wiggling your fingers, and smile faintly as the stiffness recedes. It is the kind of relief that almost makes you forget how fragile the setup is. Because here's the quirky tidbit. Medieval soldiers sometimes cooked over these very same braziers, filling the tent with the scent of stew or sizzling fat. Imagine trying to sleep while your comrade fries a strip of bacon on a metal pan barely a foot away from your head. You roll your eyes in the dark, because you know what comes next. Half the tent awake, salivating, muttering curses about greedy stomachs. Yet for all the annoyance, food and fire blurred into one another, the brazier doubling as kitchen and heater, survival in a shallow iron bowl. Still, there's a heated scholarly debate over whether soldiers actually kept braziers inside the cramped tents of the common ranks. Some historians argue that fire inside was far too dangerous, citing the ever-present risk of suffocation from smoke or outright immolation. Others point to surviving accounts of glowing pans in the quarters of not only nobles but also ordinary men. The truth, as always, is likely messy. Some camps banned it, others tolerated it, and many soldiers simply took the risk when frost made the choice between danger and death too clear to ignore. You close your eyes for a moment, letting your other senses wander. The smell hits you first, a mixture of charred wood and faint iron tang, that metallic scent of heated steel. It mixes with wool, damp canvas, and the ever-present musk of unwashed bodies. Yet the brazier adds something more, a memory of home, perhaps, of kitchens and hearths and bread baked on coals. You think of the men around you, and how many must have stared into such glows thinking of wives, children, or simply a roof that didn't flap in the wind. The brazier does its job well enough, but it also has its flaws. The heat is fickle, rising straight upward in a narrow column. Your toes remain frozen even as your palms grow pink. You wiggle your legs closer, then curse as another soldier shoves you back, claiming the better spot. In cramped quarters, even warmth becomes a contested resource. There are no polite turns. There is only shoving, muttering, and sometimes outright fights over who gets the glowing prize for the night. Another soldier, older and more cynical, points out the cost. Charcoal or wood is finite, carted across miles, fought over in villages, rationed out in handfuls. Braziers cannot burn without fuel, and fuel does not last forever. So the glow you admire is a luxury, not a guarantee. You watch the coals dim a little, and realize how fleeting this comfort is, how quickly it can vanish into grey ash. You lean closer anyway, greedily soaking in what little heat you can. The glow reflects in your eyes, flickering like candlelight. You think of how soldiers in manuscripts are sometimes drawn with a brazier between them, leaning in like moths to flame. It is not a symbol of leisure but of survival. These glowing pans were the heartbeat of a frozen camp, fragile and fleeting but deeply cherished. There is a curious story one man mutters as he shifts nearer the coals. He says he once saw soldiers in Italy fill a brazier not with wood, but with dried dung, claiming it burned longer and with less smoke. The tent erupts in laughter, half mocking, half skeptical, but you pause, wondering. Dried dung? Possibly true. Farmers used it for centuries as fuel. So why not soldiers too? You wrinkle your nose at the thought of the smell, yet you also know survival rarely smells pleasant. As you sit there staring at the glowing bowl, you can feel sleep tugging at your eyelids. The warmth is hypnotic, lulling you into a daze. Your head droops, then jerks upright again, the old rhythm of exhaustion. Yet in this trance you imagine the brazier as something more, a miniature sun, captured in iron, guarded against the darkness. Outside, the winter wind howls. Inside, this fragile star holds back the night just enough for you to survive. One soldier coughs suddenly, waving his hand at the smoke that curls faintly upward. Another mutters about headaches, about suffocation. And yes, the danger is real. Too many braziers, too little ventilation, and the tent becomes a coffin. You realize that each ember, each flicker of light, is a gamble, a silent dice roll between warmth and poison. And yet, who among you would choose cold certainty of frostbite over the chance of comfort? The glow fades slowly as the night wears on. The heat wanes, the ashes pile higher, and the once vivid coals collapse into themselves. You stretch your hands one last time, knowing the warmth will not last. Then pull your cloak around you and retreat into the itchy embrace of wool and straw. The brazier has given you just enough strength to endure another hour, another dream, another dawn. As you drift towards sleep, you wonder whether the embers will last until morning, or whether they will vanish into cold dust before your next breath. You do not know. But for now, the glow lingers on your eyelids, painting the dark with red. And in that fragile illusion, you allow yourself to believe you might make it through the night. You dream of warmth, of hearths blazing in stone cottages, of bread baking over crackling logs. But when you wake, the fantasy shatters against the reality of the tent. The brazier has gone cold. Your cloak is damp with breath and frost. Your toes ache as though they've turned to brittle twigs. You roll over, and something soft brushes against your cheek. It isn't wool or straw, it's fur. Thick, pungent, and a little greasy to the touch. You realize with a start that animal skins line part of the tent wall, and more have been piled around you in a crude attempt at insulation. Here lies another cornerstone of survival: hides and furs. That's your mainstream fact tonight. Medieval armies relied on animal skins in countless forms: cloaks made of sheepskin, blankets of deerskin, linings of rabbit or squirrel, even crude tent walls patched with leather. They were warm, durable, and easier to scavenge than woven cloth. Soldiers hunted, traded, or looted for them, and when winter pressed in, furs became the most precious treasure of all. You pull one closer now, a heavy pelt of some unfortunate beast, and drape it across your shoulders. It carries the smell of the animal still, a raw, earthy musk that clings stubbornly to your nose. It isn't pleasant, but it is reassuring in a primal way. Beneath the fur, your skin prickles as the warmth returns slowly, creeping like a cautious guest. The contrast to your scratchy wool cloak is remarkable. Wool itches, fur soothes. You sink into it with a sigh, even if the edges are stiff with old grease. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some soldiers wore cloaks made from wolf skins, complete with the head still attached. The dangling snout flopped comically when they moved, a grim parody of a living wolf. You imagine the sight rows of men wrapped in wolf hides, the heads bouncing as they marched, equal parts intimidating and absurd. Still, in the right light, you'd think an army of beasts had risen from the forest. The question, though, is whether these hides were common among all troops or reserved for the wealthy. Historians debate it constantly. Some suggest that common soldiers would have relied mostly on sheepskin, the most abundant and affordable, while fox or wolf furs were luxuries seen only on knights or commanders. Others argue that looting made such distinctions blur. When an army sacked a village or raided an estate, fur-lined cloaks could end up on the backs of anyone quick enough to grab them. The truth may be less about wealth and more about sheer opportunity. You shift again, pressing your cheek into the fur. It is coarse in some places, softer in others, and it radiates a kind of heat that seems more alive than cloth ever could. You remember that people in colder climates even lined their boots with rabbit fur, tucking it into shoes for insulation. Some wrapped fur around their wrists to stop blood from freezing in their hands. You flex your fingers, imagining the relief. Small tricks, but life-saving ones. The tent is quieter tonight. Furs dampen sound as well as cold. The howling wind outside feels muted, less threatening, as though the hides themselves are guardians against the storm. You listen to the steady breathing of the men around you, most still bundled in cloaks, some lucky enough to share the animal skins. The air smells heavier, musky, oily, with a faint undercurrent of smoke, less sharp than the wool, but deeper, grounding. One soldier chuckles softly, telling a story of a comrade who once tried to tan his own hide in camp with improvised methods, salt, ash, and brute determination. The result? A stiff, rancid mess that cracked like parchment and stank, so foul no one would sleep near him. You laugh along in the darkness, grateful that the hides around you, while pungent, are at least functional. There's another debate among scholars you think about while you lie there half asleep. Were hides used more for lining tents or for clothing? Archaeological evidence shows leather scraps mixed into camp debris, but it's unclear whether they came from garments, animal tack, or makeshift insulation. Some argue hides were essential to tent walls in northern campaigns, while others say soldiers mostly wore them. The absence of clear proof leaves you to imagine both. Tents patched like patchwork quilts, men huddled beneath cloaks still marked with hooves and tails. You run your hand across the fur again, tracing the direction of the hair. It is strangely soothing, like stroking a live animal. You feel a pang of gratitude toward the beast, even if you'll never know its name or form. It is long dead, yet it guards your life tonight. You realize this is survival in its most primal bargain. Humans borrowing warmth from the creatures they've killed, hoping to endure one more night in return. The fire outside has died down entirely now, leaving only the memory of its glow. Inside, the hides do their quiet work. Your body eases into something close to relaxation, and for the first time in nights, you don't shiver as violently. You close your eyes and imagine the warmth of a bear's den, a wolf's lair, a rabbit's burrow. For a moment, you are not a soldier at war but an animal among animals, seeking only shelter from the cold. Your breath fogs the air, condensing on the fur so that tiny droplets bead on the tips of the hair. You marvel at how the hide continues to protect you even in death, shrugging off moisture while trapping heat. It is not glamorous, it is not clean, but it is effective, and in this world, effectiveness is the only beauty that matters. The night stretches on, but you do not resent it as much. Wrapped in wool, straw beneath you, fur across your chest, you feel as close to comfort as the medieval soldier can hope to. You whisper a thank you to the nameless animal, to the farmer who bred it, to the hunter who killed it, to fate itself for dropping it into your lap. Then you let yourself slip into the fragile warmth, trusting that the fur will keep death's fingers away just a little longer. Your body jerks awake with a stab of pain that feels oddly distant, almost like a dream. You stretch your legs and realize with dismay that your boots are still on. Of course they are. You never took them off last night. You couldn't risk it. In this cold, pulling off boots means gambling with your toes, and losing that bet is permanent. That's the blunt, mainstream fact. Medieval soldiers often slept with their boots on to protect themselves from frostbite. In an age before insulated footwear, when leather hardened stiff as boards in the night, removing boots was not only inconvenient, but dangerous. Soldiers sometimes tied strips of cloth, known as foot wraps, around their feet under the boots, but even those froze stiff when wet. So the boots stayed on muddy, stinking, uncomfortable, and became as much part of the bed as the cloak. You shift and wince. The pressure of leather against swollen feet is unbearable, yet taking them off is worse. One soldier beside you groans, muttering that his toes are numb. Another wiggles his boots in the straw, as if to remind himself his feet are still attached. In the dark, you picture the horror of frostbite-blackened flesh, toes crumbling away, and you know why no one dares to bare their feet. Then comes a quirky tidbit. Soldiers sometimes stuffed grass or moss inside their boots at night, not for comfort, but for insulation. You can almost feel it now, the crunch of dried moss under your toes, the faint, earthy smell wafting upward. Some swore it worked better than socks, trapping warm air. Others laughed, saying it just turned to sludge in the morning. Still, you'd probably try it too, desperate as you are to hold on to every toe. But historians argue endlessly about whether sleeping in boots was truly universal. Some accounts hint at men removing footwear to dry them near fires, risking frozen feet for the sake of soft leather in the morning. Others suggest that officers, with larger tents and better heating, could afford the luxury of bare feet at night. It's still unclear, and you can hear the debate echoing across centuries. Comfort versus survival, convenience versus safety. You wiggle your toes inside the stiff boots, and the sensation is faint, barely there. Panic flickers. You stamp them hard against the straw until the blood rushes back with stabbing needles of pain. You grit your teeth and curse under your breath. The man next to you does the same, stomping and groaning. The tent fills with the quiet symphony of men coaxing blood back into their frozen feet. It sounds absurd, like a chorus of angry drummers. But in truth, it is just the nightly ritual of survival. The smell of boots, however, is impossible to ignore. Leather soaked in sweat and mud, never cleaned, festering with the sour tang of rot. You wrinkle your nose, but the others seem unfazed. After weeks in camp, the odor becomes background noise, just another layer in the stew of wool, smoke, and bodies. You think of your own shoes back home, fresh, clean, changed daily, and realize that here, footwear is a second skin. You notice too how boots stiffen in the cold. Some men wake to find their laces frozen solid, the leather so rigid it barely bends. They curse and bang their boots against rocks or each other's backs to soften them. Others sleep with feet tucked close to another body, using human warmth to keep leather pliable. You wonder how many boots cracked outright, splitting seams in the night, leaving soldiers to march barefoot through snow. The thought makes you shudder harder than the wind outside. Your hand drifts to the straps along your boots, feeling the rough stitching, the hardened seams. You picture the long march ahead, mud sucking at the soles, snow filling the gaps, frost gnawing at every step. No wonder soldiers clung to them. Even in sleep, boots weren't just shoes, they were lifelines. Lose them, and you might as well dig your own grave. Another soldier mutters a story about a campaign in Flanders where men boiled their leather boots in water, softening them enough to eat. The tent erupts in half-hearted laughter, though you can't tell if it's really a joke. Hunger and cold make monsters of men, and suddenly you can't help but stare at your boots, wondering just how edible they'd be if things grew desperate enough. The debate returns in your mind: were boots more valuable than cloaks, more precious than swords? Some chroniclers hinted as much, describing entire units crippled when footwear failed. You realize that, while swords win battles, boots win survival. Without them, you don't march, you don't fight, you don't live. That's why you keep them on, even in your sleep, even if your feet swell and ache. You draw your cloak tighter, curl on your side, and pull your knees up toward your chest. The boots creak against the straw, stiff but unyielding. You try to ignore the pinch at your ankles, the throb in your toes, the stink in your nostrils. Instead, you focus on the knowledge that your feet are still there, still yours, still warm enough to march tomorrow. It is a small victory, but in a frozen camp, small victories are the only kind you get. As you close your eyes again, you hear the low hum of men shifting, groaning, stamping. You imagine the sound rolling across the camp, 1,000 boots thudding faintly against straw, as though the army itself is beating a drum against the cold. A rhythm of survival, played not by musicians, but by men desperate to keep their blood moving. And in that muffled percussion, you find a strange comfort. You are not alone. Every soldier here endures the same pain, the same numb toes, the same foul smell. Together, you stamp and groan and curse and endure, and somehow, in the dark, that togetherness is enough. You curl tighter, boots pressed to your chest, but sleep is shallow and uneasy. A sudden rattle of steel jerks you awake. For a moment you think the enemy has breached the camp, but no, it is only the man beside you shifting in his armor. You squint at him through the dim glow of dying embers and realize he has chosen to sleep in full gear. Breastplate, pauldrons, gauntlets, all clanking as he tries to find a position that doesn't grind metal into bone. Here's the mainstream fact. Soldiers debated endlessly whether to sleep in armor. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War, and even earlier, show both practices. Some men wore at least part of their armor at night, convinced that being surprised by an attack meant death if they weren't ready. Others stripped it off, fearing that the circulation cut off by heavy steel would leave them half paralyzed by morning. It was a nightly gamble, security versus survival. You listen to him grunt, the plates groaning with every movement. He's not comfortable, that much is clear, yet he insists. He mutters about a raid last winter, when men were caught unarmored and slaughtered in their sleep. The fear lingers in his voice, and you understand. Better to wake stiff and bruised than not wake at all. Then comes the quirky tidbit. Some soldiers compromised by sleeping only in their chainmail shirts, called hauberks. They claimed the interlocked rings gave warmth as well as protection. Imagine it clinking into your bedroll, sounding like a bag of coins being shaken. One man in the corner chuckles about how he once woke entangled in his mail, unable to roll over without help. The tent erupts in quiet laughter, the sound muffled by wool and fur, because even in misery, comedy sneaks in. But historians still wrangle over the practicality. Did rank-and-file infantry really bother? Some argue that only knights and officers, those who had more to lose, slept in armor. Others suggest that everyone, even the humblest archer, sometimes kept steel close, if not worn outright. The archaeological record is silent on what was worn in bed, so the debate continues in warm lecture halls while you lie here, listening to steel scrape straw. The man in armor shifts again, muttering curses. You can almost feel the weight pressing down on him. Armor was no light costume, it could weigh 30, 40, even 50 pounds, depending on the period. To wear that all day in battle was punishing enough. To sleep in it was almost masochistic. And yet, he clings to the habit, fear whispering louder than comfort. You touch your own side, where your dagger rests beneath your cloak. That's your compromise. Not armor, not chainmail, but cold steel within reach. Many soldiers did the same, trusting quick reflexes more than heavy plate. Still, the thought gnaws at you. What if raiders come tonight? What if the first blow falls before you can even stand? In that moment, the man's decision to clank and suffer seems almost wise. The smell of oiled steel mingles with the musk of wool and hides. It is sharp, metallic, familiar. You close your eyes and picture rows of men, some armored, some not, all huddled in their fragile tents. The difference between them is not just strategy, but class. Officers with resources could afford to sleep armored, knowing their tents were large enough to accommodate the bulk. Poor soldiers had neither the gear nor the space. Inequality does not sleep, even in the cold. One soldier mutters that he once saw a man crushed by his own breastplate in the night, suffocated because he could not roll properly. Another scoffs, saying the tale is an exaggeration, but you can't help but shiver. To be smothered by your own protection, that is irony too sharp to laugh at. The hours crawl. The man beside you groans again, armor squealing as he turns. You imagine the bruises he will wake with, the red welts etched into his skin where the steel pressed too hard. Yet he seems content in his choice, murmuring prayers to saints who guard watchmen. Fear is a heavy blanket, but sometimes it warms better than wool. You think of your own life, where sleep means softness, where danger does not lurk beyond canvas walls. Here, every choice is tainted by risk. Armor or no armor, boots or bare feet, straw or frozen ground. Nothing is simple. Nothing is safe. The wind rattles the tent poles, and you jolt at the sound. Your hand tightens around your dagger instinctively. For a moment you consider pulling your cloak aside and strapping on the breastplate lying near your feet. But you don't. Exhaustion weighs heavier than fear tonight. You let the dagger rest within reach, trusting that if death comes, you'll meet it with steel in hand, not steel on chest. The man beside you shifts once more, his armor clanging in protest. You sigh and close your eyes, resigning yourself to the noise. Perhaps he will wake safer, perhaps not. But you realize something in the stillness. Soldiers in these camps lived their lives on the edge of decision, torn between comfort and fear, every choice a wager against death. Even in sleep, war demanded a price. You stir again, dragging your stiff body upright for a moment to catch your breath, and the air inside the tent hits you like a wet slap. Thick with the smell of damp wool, smoke, and sweat, it clings to your throat. You push open the flap for just a second and feel another sensation wash over you. Warm breath, moist and animal, steaming into the night. You glance outside, and there, tethered close to the tent, stands a row of horses. Their sides glisten faintly with frost, their nostrils puffing clouds into the dark. And here you remember another mainstream fact. Medieval soldiers often relied on their animals for warmth. Horses, mules, even oxen tethered near the tents radiated heat that seeped through the canvas, raising the temperature inside by a few precious degrees. Not much, but in a world where 1 degree could mean the difference between life and death, it mattered. Entire cavalry units staked their tents near the picket lines, not just for security but for warmth. You step closer and press your gloved hand against the flank of a horse. The animal shifts, flicking an ear, but does not shy away. The heat radiates instantly into your palm, surprising in its intensity. You imagine lying against that body, your back warmed by a furnace wrapped in hair and muscle. And, in truth, some soldiers did just that, curling into straw alongside their horses, using animals as giant living blankets. Strange? Perhaps. Effective? Absolutely. And here's the quirky tidbit. Chronicles from winter campaigns tell of soldiers deliberately leading sheep or goats into their tents, not for food, but for warmth. The animals bleated and kicked, soiling the straw, yet still they were welcomed as living heaters. You chuckle quietly, picturing a knight trying to keep his dignity while a goat climbs over his bedding. Comfort knows no pride in the cold. Still, there is debate among historians about just how widespread this practice was. Some argue that only cavalry troops truly benefited, since horses required constant attention and were naturally kept close. Others insist that camp followers and infantrymen also pulled smaller animals into their shelters, especially when snow piled too high. The written sources are sparse, and so the arguments continue. You can almost hear the voices of scholars, warm in their libraries, debating whether goats really shared tents with knights, while you stand here breathing in the proof of animal heat. The smell of the horses fills your nose musky, earthy, mixed with hay and manure. To a modern nose it may seem foul, but here, in the frozen night, it is strangely reassuring. It smells of life, of warmth, of endurance. You lean closer, your forehead brushing the coarse mane, and for a moment the cold recedes. You close your eyes, almost grateful enough to whisper thanks. Back inside the tent, the men murmur about their tethered beasts. One man brags that he'll sleep against his mare if the night grows colder. Another laughs and says his mule kicks too hard to risk it. A third tells a story of men in Poland who supposedly spooned with their cows in the snow. The tent shakes with muffled laughter, the kind born from exhaustion and desperation. You realize that ridicule and camaraderie both help keep fear away. The straw beneath you still pricks, the cloak still itches, but the thought of those animals outside eases your dread. They are more than mounts or beasts of burden. They are lifelines. You remember that knights often swore oaths to their horses, treating them almost like comrades in arms. In moments like this, it makes sense. Horses carried soldiers by day and kept them alive by night. The air warms slightly as the combined heat of men and beasts seeps together. Condensation beads on the canvas walls, dripping like rain onto your shoulders. The cold has not vanished, but it is dulled. The tent feels less like a tomb and more like a shelter, and you realize that this warmth is communal, not just human, humans and animals enduring together. You lie back down, listening to the muffled sounds of hooves pawing straw, the occasional snort of a horse, the rhythmic chewing as they grind their feed. It is oddly soothing, like a lullaby of the camp. Your fellow soldiers seem comforted too, some humming along to the rhythm, others whispering stories about their mounts, how a horse once saved them, how a mule once carried them through a river, how an ox once dragged a wagon farther than any man could. The debate flickers in your mind again. Did medieval armies really depend this much on animals for warmth, or is it an exaggerated romanticism from later chroniclers? Some scholars suggest the evidence is thin, pointing out that tents, braziers, and cloaks already provided enough explanation for survival. Others counter that the sheer practicality of using animals makes the practice almost certain. You lie there, feeling the heat seeping faintly through the canvas, and you know in your bones that it must have been true. You close your eyes, imagining yourself as part of the herd. Your cloak is your hide, your breath fogs the air, your body presses against others for warmth. You are no different from the horse tethered outside, each of you waiting for the sun to rise. The thought is humbling, even calming. The cold does not vanish, but it becomes bearable. You burrow deeper into your cloak, straw beneath you, fur across your chest, boots pinching your toes, dagger resting at your side. Around you, men snore, mutter, shift. Outside, horses stomp and breathe clouds into the sky. Together, man and beast share the night, clinging to life with nothing more than breath, hide, and stubbornness. And in that moment, you realize survival is not noble, nor elegant, nor even particularly comfortable. It is messy, smelly, cramped, and absurd. But it works. You are still here. You are still breathing. And in a medieval tent, on a freezing night, that is triumph enough. You wake again to the sound of a man gulping noisily beside you, the liquid sloshing in a wooden cup before he sighs with satisfaction. In the dim light, you catch the sour, sweet scent of wine. He offers it toward you with a grin that shows more missing teeth than whole ones, and you hesitate, but then you take a swallow. The warmth spreads almost instantly, false and fleeting, but for a moment you feel the illusion of fire in your veins. Here is your mainstream fact. Alcohol was a common companion in medieval camps, especially wine in southern regions and ale or mead in the north. It wasn't just for morale. Soldiers believed that drinking before bed helped ward off the chill, dulling discomfort and lulling them into sleep. Commanders even issued rations, not purely for pleasure but because a tipsy soldier was still alive, while a stone-cold sober one might freeze. The wine burns as it goes down, the tang sharp, the aftertaste sour from the cheap wooden cask it was drawn from. It isn't fine vintage, more like the rough swill issued by quartermasters, watered down and often spoiled. Yet, after days of shivering, you hardly care. It makes your belly warm, your eyelids heavy, and your aches just a little more distant. Then comes the quirky tidbit. Some soldiers believed spiced wine or mulled ale had magical properties, chasing out the frost with cloves, cinnamon, or pepper, if they were lucky enough to have such luxuries. Imagine the scene, a freezing camp where men huddle in cloaks, and one lucky knight sips hot wine laced with cinnamon like some pampered lord. You can almost smell it, rich and exotic, wafting through the smoke and making every other soldier groan with envy. But historians still question how effective alcohol really was for warmth. Some point out that while drink creates a sensation of heat, it actually dilates blood vessels and causes faster heat loss. Others argue that in a world without modern medicine, that illusion was good enough. It let men fall asleep when otherwise they would have tossed and turned all night in misery. The debate lingers, unresolved, leaving you to weigh science against desperation as you take another swallow. The tent stirs as more men pass around their cups. Laughter grows louder, voices rising in song, verses crooked and lewd, echoing against the canvas walls. One man slaps his thigh, another bursts into a hacking cough but still tries to sing. The wine loosens tongues, eases pain, and momentarily warms the soul if not the body. You can feel the mood shift from dreary to defiant, as though the men have fooled themselves into believing they are in a tavern rather than a mud pit. The smell of fermented grapes mixes with the musk of wool and smoke. It is sour, earthy, and comforting in its own rough way. You lean back against the straw, cup in hand, and let the fuzz creep into your mind. The cold still nips at your feet, but you hardly notice. The wine is louder than the frost. One soldier tells a story about a captain who swore by burnt wine, heated to steaming, and mixed with honey, insisting it kept his men from freezing during a siege. Another interrupts with a bawdy joke about warming the blood in other ways, and the tent erupts into laughter again. You shake your head but smile despite yourself. Humor and wine are brothers. Both keep men alive when reality bites too hard. You glance around the tent, seeing faces glow red in the brazier's fading light, eyes half-lidded, mouths stained with drink. Some slump onto their straw already, snoring loudly. Others clutch their cups like talismans, sipping slowly, savoring the last drop before surrendering to sleep. It strikes you that this ritual is as much about comfort as it is about warmth. To drink together is to remind one another that you are still human, still alive, still capable of joy in small doses. The night grows quieter as the cups empty. Snores rise, heavy and uneven. A few men mutter in their dreams, some with laughter still bubbling in their throats. You feel yourself drifting too, lulled by the lingering heat in your stomach. For a moment, you almost forget the frozen world beyond the canvas walls. Yet even here, doubt creeps in. You know that the warmth is false, that the wine cannot stop frostbite, that in some ways it even hastens it. You wonder how many soldiers never woke after a night of drinking, lulled into oblivion while the cold crept silently through their veins. Historians suggest it happened more often than recorded. The quiet deaths of men mistaken for simple sleep. The thought sobers you, makes you glance at your own hand gripping the cup. But you drink anyway, because what else is there? Without fire, without furs, without hope, you drink. You close your eyes, let the warmth trick you, and surrender yourself to sleep. You dream of hearths, of taverns, of laughter without fear, and for a few short hours, you are not a soldier in a frozen camp. You are simply a man with a cup, safe in the illusion of heat. And when morning comes, when the frost bites again, you will rise with the others, stamping your boots, cursing your numb fingers, and carrying on. Because in this world, survival is built on illusions, and sometimes illusions are enough. The wine's warmth fades, and the tent sinks into a heavier silence. Men shift in their cloaks, some muttering, some already snoring in a drunken stupor. You close your eyes, hoping sleep will take you, but instead your ears pick up the soft hum of a voice at the far end of the tent. It is low, rhythmic, more chant than song. Soon another joins, then a third, until the murmurs blend into something you recognize, not a tavern tune, not a bawdy ballad, but a prayer. That's your mainstream fact for the night. Before sleep, many medieval soldiers prayed. In a world where cold, hunger, and ambush loomed over every dusk, faith was as practical as wool or straw. Chronicles often mention evening prayers in camp, whether whispered alone or led by a chaplain. Soldiers asked for warmth, safety, forgiveness, and most of all the strength to wake up alive the next morning. You listen to the muttered Latin phrases, half understood by most of the men repeating them. Pater Noster, Ave Maria. The syllables roll like waves, carrying with them a calm that the smoky air alone cannot provide. Even men too drunk to stand join in, their words slurred but earnest. You feel the sound wrap around you like a second cloak. It is not heat, but it is comfort. And then comes the quirky tidbit. Some soldiers carried tiny relics or charms, believing these held power against the cold as much as against enemy swords. A sliver of saint's bone, a fragment of cloth said to be holy, even a pebble from a church floor, these little talismans were tucked into boots or sewn into cloaks. You picture a hardened mercenary clutching a bone fragment in one hand while muttering prayers with cracked lips, convinced it will keep the frost from stealing his breath. Yet historians still argue about how much of this faith was sincere and how much was ritual. Did soldiers truly believe divine intervention kept them warm, or was it simply a habit that soothed the mind? Some scholars insist the prayers were pragmatic psychology, a way to ease terror and quiet the mind before sleep. Others believe devotion ran deeper, that men trusted saints and angels as much as straw and fire. The truth, as usual, is murky. But as you lie there, you feel how the rhythm of prayer steadies your heartbeat, how it makes the tent feel less like a coffin and more like a chapel. One soldier beside you whispers a private plea, not in Latin but in the rough tongue of his village. He begs for his wife and children to be kept safe, for his own body to endure another night. You hear the catch in his voice and realize faith is not just ritual, it is also longing. Another soldier clutches a wooden cross, thumb tracing its edges until the grooves shine smooth. In the glow of the dying brazier, the wood looks worn enough to have traveled through dozens of campaigns, perhaps handed down through generations. The atmosphere in the tent shifts. The rowdiness of wine fades, replaced by something quieter, steadier. Even those who do not murmur prayers lie silently, listening. The howling wind outside sounds distant, less threatening. For a few minutes you almost believe the canvas itself is blessed, made stronger by the words whispered within. You let your own mind drift, thinking of how faith and fear walk hand in hand. You don't know if the prayer truly keeps the cold at bay, but you do know that your body relaxes, that your teeth stop chattering, that you feel less alone. Perhaps that is miracle enough. There is a story whispered from one side of the tent, of a siege where soldiers swore an apparition of a saint walked among them at night, cloaking them in warmth so they did not freeze. The man who tells it insists his grandfather saw it himself. Others chuckle skeptically, but no one openly denies it. When you are this cold, hope, even absurd hope, is a welcome blanket. The smell of incense even comes to your mind, though there is none here. You imagine how some wealthier camps, especially on crusade, might have had chaplains burning herbs or resin during prayers, filling tents with sweet smoke instead of the sour musk you breathe now. You envy that vision, but then again, you remind yourself that even this half-drunken, half-mumbled prayer is a kind of incense, not to the nose, but to the heart. The minutes stretch, the prayers taper off, and silence reclaims the space. Yet the comfort lingers. The tent no longer feels like a cold trap, but like a sanctuary. Thin and fragile though it is, you curl deeper into your cloak, straw beneath you, boots still on, fur across your chest, dagger at your side. Around you men drift to sleep with lips still moving, words trailing into dreams. You sigh, letting your eyes close. Faith, relic, prayer, whether superstition or salvation, it eases you enough to surrender to rest. The frost may bite, the wind may howl, but for this one night you believe you are guarded. The night drags on, and though the prayers have quieted, the camp is never truly silent. A cough here, a groan there, the steady shuffling of men trying to twist themselves into bearable positions. You roll over and suddenly notice something that stings your pride as much as your skin. The sound of laughter drifting from a neighboring pavilion. The tone is lighter, freer. Not the coarse chuckles of men huddled like sardines, but the relaxed mirth of officers, their tent glowing faintly from within. Here's a widely attested reality. Rank-shaped comfort in medieval camps. Commanders and knights slept under larger pavilions, often round or rectangular structures supported by stout poles, while ordinary soldiers squeezed into low canvas shelters barely big enough to crouch in. In the Bayeux tapestry itself, you can see Norman tents depicted tall and colourful, an artistic reminder that the wealthy brought their comforts even to war. You glance toward that glowing tent, bitterly aware of the difference. Within it, officers lounge on rugs or pallets, perhaps even elevated from the frozen ground on wooden platforms. Some sip the last of their spiced wine, others recline on fur-lined cushions. Meanwhile, you pull your cloak tighter and press your face into damp straw, feeling the cold seep into your cheeks. And now, for an odd note that survives in chronicles, some high-ranking leaders brought featherbeds into the field. Imagine that while common soldiers stamped their feet to keep blood flowing, a duke or baron stretched luxuriously on goose down. There are even accounts of nobles shipping entire household furnishings to campaign grounds, their pavilions resembling small houses more than tents. You can almost hear the resentment bubbling among the rank and file, men muttering about their lord's velvet curtains while their own canvas leaks rain onto their faces. Modern researchers remain divided about just how extreme this disparity was. Some argue that stories of featherbeds and lavish furnishings were exaggerations, written to mock nobles' decadence. Others suggest that for the wealthiest, such indulgences were perfectly real, because war was as much about display as survival. Evidence of ornate tent poles and decorated fabrics found in archaeology does lend some weight to the latter view. Still, the truth likely varied. Some lords indulged, others endured. The glow of the officers' pavilion nags at you. The faint silhouettes of men shifting across thick rugs are a cruel reminder of inequality. You wonder if they ever feel guilt, or if comfort numbs them too well. In your tent, someone spits into the straw and mutters a curse. Another soldier whispers a bitter joke. When the frost kills us, the captains will use our cloaks as napkins. The laughter that follows is sharp, tinged with spite. The smell wafting from that richer tent is different too. Instead of smoke and sour wool, you catch hints of burning resin incense, perhaps, or aromatic wood. A luxury meant not just to mask the stench but to soothe nerves. You imagine lying there, eyes closed, while sweet smoke curls around you, convincing you that the battlefield is miles away. Compared to the rank air in your shelter, it seems another world. Yet, in a strange way, resentment fuels survival. The grumbling in your tent binds you closer to your fellows. Your misery is shared, and so is your anger. The gap between classes is obvious, but it also gives you something to mock, to rail against, to cling to as proof that you are tougher than those pampered figures across the field. If they need velvet curtains, you think, then they are weaker than you. One soldier recounts a tale of a noble's pavilion collapsing in a storm, burying his feather bed in mud. The tent erupts in laughter, loud enough that you fear it will carry, but no one cares. For a few moments, laughter is warmer than any cloak. The wind rattles both tents, the grand one and yours, and you take a certain grim satisfaction in knowing that canvas is canvas, whether stitched with silk or hemp. In the end, the storm treats all fabric equally. Perhaps that is the only true equality here. The sky doesn't care if you are knight or peasant. The frost gnaws at all. Still, when the laughter dies down and the officer's pavilion glows steadily on, envy seeps back into your bones. You curl tighter into your straw, muttering under your breath. The cold will not break you tonight, even if comfort belongs to others. Survival is its own victory, and you will cling to that when the frost whispers otherwise. You drift in and out of shallow sleep until a new sound stirs you. The tearing rip of fabric and the shuffle of feet in the dark. At first you think raiders have slipped into the camp, but then you hear the unmistakable thump of wood against earth, the grunt of men hauling something heavy. You lift the tent flap slightly and see shadows moving from the distant village. Piles of canvas, rope, and armfuls of straw are being dragged toward the army's rows of shelters. And it strikes you with a jolt of clarity those tents you've been huddling under aren't always the neat, orderly supplies issued from some royal storehouse. Much of the time, they are simply taken. That's a fact. Grounded in countless campaigns, soldiers routinely dismantled barns, stripped cottages, and plundered weaving shops to outfit their camps. War consumed not only lives but roofs and rafters too. Chronicles tell of villages left bare overnight, their walls gutted for timber, their thatch stolen for bedding. The battlefield didn't just bleed men, it bled entire landscapes. You watch as a small group passes, arms full of a tapestry torn straight from a church wall. They laugh while staggering under its weight, boasting that it will make fine insulation for their captain's tent. You lie back on your straw, seething at the unfairness, but also aware of the grim practicality. Survival always came at someone else's expense. A curious image lingers in your mind. Soldiers sleeping beneath canvas dyed with painted saints, once meant to glorify God inside a chapel. Now, those same holy figures sag in the mud, their eyes staring blankly at the night sky. It's a detail too strange to ignore, one of those grotesque ironies of war. You warm yourself with stolen sanctity, with no thought of blasphemy when frost stiffens your fingers. And yet, historians remain divided about how systematic this looting really was. Some argue that official quartermasters supplied tents, especially for royal armies, and that tales of theft were exaggerated by chroniclers eager to paint soldiers as brutes. Others counter that the archaeological evidence, torn textiles, reused beams, even charred church fittings found near camp remains, suggests the practice was widespread. The debate has no neat conclusion, but what is certain is that armies rarely carried everything they needed. They took what they could, from whomever they could, and survival left little room for scruples. Back inside your tent, the murmurs rise as men gossip about the day's plunder. One swears he saw an officer bedding down on velvet curtains stripped from a manor. Another complains bitterly that common soldiers are left with damp straw while their lords sleep on brocade. The resentment simmers like a slow fire, another form of heat in the freezing night. The smell drifts in next fresh hay mixed with smoke and something sharper, the scent of paint and wax scraped from looted icons. You wrinkle your nose, imagining the ruined homes behind those smells. Somewhere, a villager wakes in a roofless house, shivering, cursing the soldiers who now lie warmer because of his loss. You wonder if he will survive the winter at all. One soldier nearby shrugs when the subject comes up. "Better them than us," he mutters. "They'll hate us either way." Another, younger and less hardened, shakes his head but says nothing. You sense his unease, the lingering thought that every comfort here is stolen. Yet no one discards their gains. No one marches into the dark to return a single strand of thatch. You curl back into your cloak, the prickly straw beneath you suddenly heavier with guilt. The knowledge gnaws at you. Your warmth tonight might be bought at the price of a farmer's misery. And still, your body refuses to surrender it. Cold erases morality. When frost grips your bones, you cling to whatever keeps you alive, no matter where it came from. As the night deepens, the wind rattles the canvas. You close your eyes and picture the village now empty, its walls hollow, its roofs stripped bare. The camp stands stronger for it, glowing faintly with stolen light. Survival, it seems, is always theft of life, of comfort, of warmth. And you, wrapped in wool and fur, lying on straw that once belonged to someone else, are as much thief as soldier. You wake with a start, and for a moment you don't know what has roused you. Then you feel it, your breath stiff on your upper lip, hardened into a brittle crust. You reach up, and your fingers meet tiny shards of ice clinging to your mustache and beard. The sensation is bizarre, like your own body has turned traitor, freezing itself from the inside out. It is a well-recorded reality that soldiers often woke to find their breath crystallized in their facial hair or even in the folds of their cloaks. Medieval chronicles, especially during sieges in northern Europe, describe men scraping frost from their faces and clothing before they could even stand. It wasn't just discomfort, it was proof of how viciously cold the nights became, when even the act of breathing turned into a trap that iced you over. You tilt your head and notice others suffering the same fate. A man nearby rubs his beard roughly with his gloved hands, snapping off tiny white flakes that fall onto the straw like snow. Another swears and spits, his saliva freezing before it hits the ground. The sight is comical in a cruel way. Rows of warriors who look like they've dipped their faces in sugar. And here's a peculiar little detail. Some soldiers smeared animal fat or even resin into their beards before sleep, claiming it kept frost from clinging. Imagine that faces slick and greasy, shining in the brazier's glow, men grinning as though proud of their innovation. The smell, of course, would have been horrendous. But when your choice is reeking like a slaughterhouse or waking with an icicle beard, the decision is easier than you'd think. Specialists in medieval life remain uncertain just how widespread such tricks were. Some say the stories of frozen beards are exaggerated, flourishes from chroniclers eager to dramatize winter suffering. Others argue that the phenomenon is perfectly plausible, given what we know about condensation and sub-zero nights in canvas tents. Archaeological traces can't exactly prove frost on beards, so the debate remains unresolved, but if you've ever stepped outside in bitter cold, you know the truth doesn't need parchment to validate it. The air inside the tent feels sharp, slicing with every breath. You cover your mouth with your cloak, inhaling through wool, hoping the fabric will warm the air before it reaches your lungs. Around you, the chorus of coughs grows louder, rough and ragged. Cold damages not just skin but throats and lungs, and you realize that every soldier here risks illness as much as frostbite. The sound of men hacking in the dark is as constant as the flap of the canvas in the wind. You scrape your own mustache roughly, watching bits of frost fall onto your lap. They glitter briefly before melting into damp spots, soaking your cloak. The damp is almost worse than the frost itself. Wet wool clings and chills faster than dry. You pull the cloak tighter, muttering under your breath. Survival here is never just one battle but a dozen little skirmishes against frost, against damp, against your own body's betrayal. One man jokes hoarsely, "At least we save on sugar. We carry it on our lips." The tent chuckles weakly, though no one has the strength for true laughter. Humor becomes another blanket, thin but precious. You join in the chuckling, even as your fingers ache from rubbing your beard raw. The smell inside the tent is heavier tonight. Smoke from a faint brazier, sweat sealed in damp cloaks, and now the faint animal musk of grease rubbed into beards. It is pungent, close, oppressive, but in an odd way reassuring. Each scent confirms that you and your comrades are still alive, still exhaling frost into the air. The canvas itself crackles with frost, edges stiff like parchment. You tap it with a finger, and a thin sheet of ice flakes down onto your hand. You realize the entire tent has become a frozen cocoon, every breath of its occupants painting a fresh layer of ice onto the fabric. And yet, beneath that icy crust, you endure. You lie back again, feeling the weight of fatigue press into your chest. The frost melts slowly from your mustache, dripping onto your lips. It tastes faintly of iron and smoke. You close your eyes, shivering, and let the absurdity of it all wash over you. Mighty soldiers reduced to scraping their own frozen breath from their faces. But survival often looks ridiculous. It is not the glory of battle or the pride of banners. It is frost in your beard, damp in your cloak, straw scratching your back, boots bruising your feet. It is waking each morning stiff and sore, yet waking nonetheless. And so, you drift back into fitful half-sleep, the crackle of ice in your beard a reminder that you are still breathing, still alive, still stubborn enough to endure. The frost may claim your mustache, but not your will, not tonight. The night refuses to loosen its grip, and by now your body has learned every shade of cold. The sting that bites your fingertips, the dull ache deep in your bones, the shivers that ripple uncontrollably through your frame. You roll over and hear a faint clink. Someone nearby is shifting a bundle of stones wrapped in cloth. One slips free, and when it touches your hand, you recoil in surprise. It is warm, not blazing, not fiery, but radiating a steady, fading heat. This is one of the cleverer realities of medieval camps. Soldiers heated stones in the fire before nightfall and carried them into their tents, sometimes wrapping them in spare cloth or leather to prevent burns. The stones, baked until they glowed faintly red, retained warmth for hours, slowly releasing it as the tent plunged into darkness. Chronicles from Northern Europe and even Crusader camps mention this practice, a humble but effective trick against death by frost. You draw the stone toward you, cradling it in both hands. Its warmth seeps into your palms, a tiny miracle. You tuck it beneath your cloak, pressing it against your chest. It is astonishing how something so ordinary, just a lump of rock, can feel like treasure greater than gold. You close your eyes briefly, savoring the comfort. And here's a curious flourish. Some soldiers supposedly tucked these hot stones into boots or even under their tunics, nestled against their bellies. Imagine the sight: grim warriors carrying little glowing bundles like infants, swaddled in cloth. A few unlucky ones burned themselves badly, the stones searing through fabric and raising blisters. Still, risk was preferable to freezing. Even pain could be better than numbness. Scholars remain unsure how widespread this practice truly was. Some argue that heating stones was mostly a peasant trick, learned from rural households that used hearthstones to warm bedding. Others claim that soldiers across Europe adopted it readily, given its simplicity. Archaeological finds of scorched rocks in former campsites hint that it happened often, though the evidence cannot confirm whether they were for cooking, forges, or warmth. The uncertainty lingers, like smoke in the air. You press the stone closer, letting it anchor you against the night. Its weight is reassuring, a reminder that survival often lies in the simplest acts. Around you, other soldiers shuffle their own bundles, muttering contentedly when they find a still warm one. The rustle of cloth and the faint clatter of rocks fill the tent like an odd percussion ensemble. It is both comical and comforting, an army of men tucked in with their hot stones, pretending, if only for a moment, that they have hearths of their own. The smell of scorched earth clings to your hands. It mixes with smoke, wool, and damp straw, adding another layer to the camp's unique perfume. You inhale deeply, and though it isn't pleasant, it is grounding. This smell is proof of ingenuity, proof that men will wrest warmth from anything, even the earth itself. One soldier near you whispers about how his grandmother back home used to place hot stones at the foot of her bed on icy nights. Another adds that in his village, women heated bricks and wrapped them in towels for children. The stories ripple through the tent, weaving memory and survival together. You realize how war borrows from home, stealing every scrap of domestic knowledge and repurposing it for the battlefield. The warmth fades slowly, inevitably. You can feel the stone cooling, the heat bleeding away into the night. You clutch it tighter, as though you can will it to last longer. It reminds you of life itself, bright and fierce for a while, then slowly dimming, yet cherished to the very end. You think of how many soldiers clung to these stones, whispering prayers or curses as they cooled in their arms. The debate flickers in your mind: were such measures enough, or merely symbolic gestures against overwhelming cold? Some historians dismiss them as minor comforts, while others argue they might have been life-saving in the harshest winters. You don't need a lecture to know that right now, this fading warmth feels like the difference between sleep and endless shivering. Your eyelids droop, your breath fogs the air, and you curl around the stone like it is the last ember of a dying fire. Around you, men do the same, their silhouettes hunched, arms folded over their hidden treasures. The tent creaks in the wind, frost rattles against the canvas, but inside, dozens of stones glow invisibly in the dark, their warmth stitching a fragile barrier between the living and the frozen. And as you drift into half-sleep, you realize something simple yet profound. Survival in these camps wasn't about grand strategies or knightly valor. It was about tricks like this: warming a stone, wrapping it in cloth, and holding it close until morning. The great battles filled the chronicles, but the small victories like this faint warmth against your chest were what truly kept armies alive. You surrender to the warmth while it lasts, knowing it will be gone by dawn, yet grateful for every moment it endures. The stone cools, your body stiffens again, but you cling to the memory of its heat. It is proof that even in the darkest night, the earth itself can lend you strength. The stone has cooled, its heat no more than a ghost against your ribs, and you awake to the sound of wind gnawing at the canvas. A flap bangs loose, letting in a sharp draft that makes the whole tent groan like a ship at sea. You pull your cloak tighter and realize something you have always known but never wanted to admit. Winter campaigning was never the plan. The cold was an enemy no commander wanted to face. This is a matter of record. Armies in the Middle Ages generally avoided campaigning in deep winter. Campaign seasons usually ran from late spring through early autumn. Harvest had to be gathered, supply lines needed passable roads, and men were less likely to desert when conditions weren't unbearable. When possible, kings and captains disbanded their forces before frost set in. Yet, as you lie here with breath clouding the air, you know exceptions abounded. Sieges dragged on for months, sometimes years. Retreat wasn't always an option, and the cold became just another front in the war. You think of the Great Siege of Antioch during the First Crusade, when soldiers shivered through the winters of 1097–1098, eating boiled leather and gnawing on rats to survive. Chroniclers describe men dropping in the snow outside the walls, their corpses stiff before morning light. You picture yourself among them, breath frosting, bones aching, waiting for dawn that never warms. And then you remember a curious, almost absurd custom. Some commanders deliberately kept men marching even in bitter weather because the constant movement kept blood flowing. One account tells of entire units forced to tramp in circles around the camp just before bedding down, stamping feet and swinging arms to beat back frost. You imagine 1,000 weary soldiers trudging in rings like some bizarre midnight dance, too exhausted to complain but too fearful to stop. Modern historians still wrestle with the question of how often true winter warfare occurred. Some insist it was rare, that most kings avoided it except in dire necessity. Others argue that in regions like Scandinavia or the Baltic, cold weather campaigns were normal, even strategic, since frozen rivers made easier highways than muddy summer roads. The evidence varies by region, leaving scholars divided. But here, inside this sagging tent, you know one truth. Whether by choice or by cruel fate, winter has always been the harshest battlefield. The tent creaks again, the flap slapping against its pole. You hear mutters from your comrades as another draft snakes in. One curses the commander who dragged them here in winter. Another swears he will desert come morning. Yet no one rises. The frost has pinned you all down, as surely as chains. The smells are sharper tonight, smoke from hastily dampened fires, sweat thick in wool, the sour tang of breath frozen in the air. The odors mingle with the faint scent of pine drifting from the forests nearby, a cruel reminder of nature's beauty while you suffer at its mercy. You close your eyes, imagining those trees as shelter, thick and safe, but you know in reality they are bare, skeletal, as exposed as you are. You roll onto your back, staring at the canvas roof, its surface glittering faintly with frost. You can trace the shape of ice crystals spreading along the seams, delicate and cruel. Each gust of wind makes the whole structure shudder, and you wonder how many tents collapse outright under the weight of snow. You imagine men waking buried, clawing their way out of suffocating drifts, or worse, never waking at all. One of the older soldiers near you begins muttering about past campaigns, when entire armies lost more men to frost than to swords. He says he once saw bodies lined up in rows, their faces peaceful, as if they had simply fallen asleep. No wounds, no battle cries, just the quiet victory of cold. The tent falls silent as he speaks, no one daring to break the spell. You feel the truth of his words in your bones. Yet there is another side. A younger soldier counters with a story of a siege in summer, where disease and rot claimed more lives than winter ever could. He insists that cold may be cruel, but heat and filth are crueler still. The men grumble, half agreeing, half scoffing. The debate is timeless. Which season is deadlier? Which enemy more merciless, winter's frost or summer's plague? No answer comes, only silence, and the restless shuffle of men searching for sleep. You breathe deeply, the air sharp as needles, and let the argument wash over you. In truth, both sides are right. War has no gentle season. The year turns, and suffering takes a new form. Tonight, though, it is winter's turn to claim its due. The hours crawl. You press your boots against another man's shins for warmth, ignoring his grumble. You tug your cloak over your face to block the draft, inhaling the sour, smoky fabric until your head spins. You try not to think of the noble officers who will wake tomorrow in pavilions lined with rugs, or the villagers who shiver in roofless homes stripped for your straw. Instead, you focus on the rhythm of survival. Stamp your feet, rub your hands, breathe slowly, and pray morning comes quickly. Eventually, your eyelids sag. Sleep comes not as comfort, but as surrender, dragging you down into half-dreams of endless marches across frozen fields. In your dreams, you walk on ice that cracks beneath every step, your boots stiff, your breath trailing behind you in long white ribbons. You wake briefly, heart racing, but realize you are still in the tent, still alive, still trapped in winter's grip. And so you settle again, muttering a curse at the season itself. Winter was never meant for war, and yet here you are, one more soldier testing the patience of frost. You close your eyes, resigned, and cling to the fragile hope that dawn will break the siege of the night. You shift in your straw bed, the cold gnawing steadily, and your mind drifts to comparisons. Not all soldiers fought the same way against the night. What works here in this muddy field might fail utterly elsewhere. You think of distant lands of Scandinavia in the north, Spain in the south, and realize the tricks of survival varied as much as the people who used them. One thing is firmly attested in chronicles. Northern troops, hardened to brutal winters, relied heavily on reindeer hides, seal skins, and layered wool garments. Viking descendants in later centuries still wrapped themselves in furs so thick they resembled bears more than men. Their tents were lined with animal skins, and some even built temporary snow walls to shield camps from wind. Compared to your flimsy canvas, that sounds like luxury born of necessity. In contrast, soldiers from warmer lands trusted in wool cloaks and layered tunics, less prepared for deep frost. Spanish and Italian troops sometimes suffered terribly when dragged into northern campaigns. Accounts from the Hundred Years' War describe southern mercenaries bewildered by snow, huddling desperately in cloaks too thin to stop the bite. One chronicler even noted that men from Aragon cursed the sky itself when frost pinned them in place. The clash of climates turned every campaign into a cruel experiment. And then there are the stranger methods, like the story of Baltic warriors who supposedly rubbed themselves with bear grease before sleep, believing it sealed in warmth. You picture the tent filled with the reek of rancid fat, men glistening like wax candles, snoring loudly while their comrades gag. It may sound absurd, but desperation makes all tricks worth trying. Odd customs like these ripple through records, half survival, half superstition. Scholars, as ever, are divided over how much weight to give these regional variations. Some argue that climate determined everything, that soldiers carried their homeland habits wherever they marched, adapting poorly to new environments. Others counter that armies were quick to copy what worked, learning from locals and enemies alike. The evidence is patchy, a mention in a chronicle here, a scrap of fur-lined cloth in an excavation there. Still, the argument continues, leaving only fragments of certainty. You turn onto your back and imagine yourself as a soldier in Scandinavia, snow piled high outside, but your tent warm with reindeer hides and felted wool. The air still bites, but you endure. Then you imagine yourself as a Spaniard dragged north, teeth chattering, cloak sodden with sleet, cursing the day you left home. Which is worse? To live in cold and be hardened to it, or to stumble into it unprepared? The smells shift depending on the vision. In the north, your nose fills with the musk of hides, resinous pine smoke, and fish oil lamps. In the south, it is wool soaked with rain, smoke from olive wood fires, and the faint tang of cheap wine. Both camps stink, but the scents tell different stories. Survival always has a smell, you realize that more with every passing night. The men in your tent begin a hushed conversation about past marches. One recalls fighting with mercenaries from Castile, who shivered so badly they could barely hold their crossbows. Another swears he saw men from Sweden stride barefoot across snow without complaint, their skin raw but their faces calm. The contrast stuns you, makes you marvel at human stubbornness. What breaks one man barely touches another. You wrap your cloak tighter and wonder which kind you are, the hardened northerner or the shivering southerner. The truth, you suspect, is somewhere in between. You endure because you must, not because you were born to it. The debate among the soldiers drifts into jokes. One man laughs that northerners sleep with seals while southerners sleep with goats. Another claims the French are worst of all, complaining in every climate, neither hardy in cold nor at ease in heat. The laughter spreads, warming the air more than any brazier could. It is the same lesson repeated night after night. Humor is insulation. The tent rustles as the wind rattles it again, and you press your boots deeper into the straw. You imagine distant camps, the techniques they use, the sounds and smells that shape them. You realize survival is not universal. It is a patchwork quilt of habits, tricks, and inherited wisdoms. What keeps a man alive in Norway might fail in Lombardy, and what comforts a Spaniard might be useless in Livonia. The cold respects no uniform, no banner, no tongue. And yet, across all regions, one truth unites them. Men endure. They adapt, they borrow, they improvise. They huddle in cloaks, smear themselves in grease, curl against beasts, and pray to saints. Each land gives its soldiers different tools, but the struggle is the same, the fight to wake when dawn comes. You close your eyes again, letting the wind batter the canvas, and for a fleeting moment you feel connected to all of them, the fur-wrapped northerners, the wool-swaddled southerners, the grease-smeared Balts. Across centuries and miles, you all share the same shiver, the same groan, the same stubborn breath fogging the frozen air. The night staggers on, though you've lost all sense of time. The sky outside could be midnight or dawn. Both feel equally distant. You shift in the straw and hear the steady creak of leather harnesses. For a moment you think horses are being saddled, but then it dawns on you, no, that sound is closer. It is men rolling restlessly, boots squeaking, straps tugging against their tunics. And you remember the truth that every soldier knows. Warmth comes not only from what you wear at night, but from what you did all day. It is a fact, every commander understood. Marching kept soldiers alive. Movement pumped blood, drove out stiffness, and blunted the cold. An army that kept moving by day endured better by night, however miserable the tents. Chroniclers of winter campaigns often noted how men dreaded long halts. Stillness was deadly. Better to trudge through mud or snow than sit idly while frost chewed at fingers and toes. You recall the endless tramping of the day, mud sucking at your boots, your cloak heavy with sleet, your breath wheezing clouds into the air. At the time you cursed every step. Now, lying motionless, you almost miss it. The aching march was cruel, but it kept blood hot, toes tingling, muscles alive. Here in stillness, your body becomes a slow-dying ember. And then there is the peculiar custom some soldiers swore by. Before bed, men would rise and run laps around the perimeter of the camp, stamping and clapping like drunken dancers, until their bodies steamed. You picture the sight, dozens of weary figures circling the tents under moonlight, sweat freezing on their brows, even as they crawled back into the straw. Ridiculous, perhaps, but desperate habits often worked. Specialists still puzzle over how deliberate these routines were. Some argue commanders ordered them, enforcing movement as discipline. Others suggest soldiers invented the practice themselves, small circles of men choosing to fight cold in the only way they knew. The evidence is fragmentary references in letters, anecdotes in chronicles, but the image lingers. An army warming itself not with fire, but with its own frantic motion. You stretch your legs under the cloak and feel the dull ache of yesterday's march. Every joint throbs, every tendon complains, yet part of you is grateful. The soreness means you are still alive, still moving. Around you, men murmur about tomorrow's route, how many miles, what rivers to cross, what villages to strip for food and straw. No one wants to march, but everyone knows they must. To lie still too long is to die. The smells of the camp reinforce the memory. Damp leather, horse sweat, and churned earth, all scents of the march cling stubbornly to your cloak. They remind you of daytime survival, of stamping boots in rhythm, of shields banging together in crude songs, of hands swinging like pendulums to keep blood moving. The odors are sour, but oddly they comfort you, proof that your body is not yet surrendered to the frost. One man groans and mutters about a march in Burgundy where they trudged until midnight, not for strategy but simply to keep from freezing. Another laughs darkly, saying commanders lied, pretending every extra mile was tactical, when really it was just survival disguised as military wisdom. The tent chuckles softly. Perhaps both are true. Your mind wanders to the irony. You complain at every march, yet long for it when night falls. War breeds contradictions. The same feet that blister by day are the ones you thank by night for keeping blood alive. You curse the mud, then pray for another march, if only to feel warmth again. Survival is not consistent. It shifts with the hour, the weather, the whim of chance. The wind groans through the ropes, and you curl tighter. You imagine yourself outside again, slogging through snow under a pale sky, the rhythm of steps numbing thought. You hear the crunch of boots, the groan of carts, the snorts of horses. Miserable though it is, marching gives you control. Each step is proof you are still fighting, still refusing to yield. In the tent, you are passive prey to the cold. On the road, at least, you strike back with every pace. The men around you fall quiet, some dozing, some muttering half-dreams of tomorrow's route. You lie awake, aware of the stillness in your body, longing for motion. You flex your toes inside your boots, stamp them lightly against the straw, pretending you are still walking. It is pitiful, but it is enough to reassure you. You are not frozen yet. The historians may debate how much marching was tactical and how much was survival, but for you the answer is obvious. The road itself is a shield, each mile a weapon against death. You close your eyes, humming faintly the rhythm of marching songs, and let your body imagine it is moving still. Sleep creeps closer, wrapping you like a cloak, and you surrender to it with the faintest smile. You wake again, this time not to frost or footsteps, but to sound low voices weaving together, the kind of rhythm that pulls you out of half-dreams and into the present. At first you think it is prayer again, but then you catch a familiar lilt. It is a song, a rough ballad, the kind soldiers have carried from village to village, patched with new verses every time a campfire retells it. There's no denying the fact. Music and song were as much a survival tool as cloaks or fires. Chroniclers occasionally describe soldiers gathering around dwindling embers, lifting their voices not for glory but for warmth of spirit. In the hush of a frozen night, a tune could be a second blanket, woven of memory and humor. It was a way to remind yourself you were still alive, still human, not just another body stiffening in the frost. The men croon in uneven harmony, voices cracked from cold air, some too weary to hold the tune, others too loud with drink. The lyrics shift between longing for home and mocking commanders. You smile at the refrain, half a curse, half a joke poking fun at the noblemen in their velvet pavilions. Laughter breaks the rhythm, but it doesn't matter. The laughter is part of the song. And here's one of those curious details. Some soldiers kept rattles, simple instruments carved from gourds or fashioned from bones, to keep time with their singing. You picture a man shaking one now, straw rustling as he taps his foot, the sound filling the tent with something resembling joy. Crude, yes, but when your choices are silence or laughter, you choose laughter. Scholars continue to wonder just how much of this music was ritual and how much was improvisation. Was it organized, led by a designated singer, a half-bard, half-soldier who knew the verses? Or was it spontaneous, drunken mumbling turning into chorus by accident? Some argue the tradition of marching songs must have carried naturally into camp. Others insist the cold nights were too harsh for wasted breath. No clear answer exists. What remains are fragments, verses, scribbled in margins of manuscripts, echoes of melodies long lost. But here, in this moment, you don't need parchment evidence. You can hear it, feel it, almost see it, the song binding men closer than the canvas walls. The cold recedes, not gone but quieter, drowned out by voices. The air smells the same wool, smoke, sweat, but it seems less oppressive. The rhythm of the song moves your heart faster, warms you like a fire never could. You hum along quietly, not knowing the words but catching the tune. The man beside you slaps your shoulder, grinning, urging you to join. Soon your voice wavers into the chorus, awkward but sincere. The others cheer you, though it is little more than a wheeze from dry lungs. You laugh despite yourself, realizing the truth. The cold can take your strength, your comfort, but not your ability to mock it in song. Another soldier launches into a bawdy verse about fleas in his straw, and the tent erupts. For a moment, the laughter is so loud it drowns the wind outside. Men clutch their sides, tears freezing on their cheeks as they howl. The song collapses into cackles, then rebuilds itself on another verse. Slower, sadder this time, a homesick melody about wives, about bread, about fields that wait for them. The mood shifts like smoke, one moment rowdy, the next tender. The flicker of the brazier catches their faces, and you see them softened, almost childlike. Hardened men swaying together, voices trembling with memories of home. You close your eyes and picture your own hearth, the voices of your family, the familiar creak of your own bed. It aches in your chest, but it warms you too. Nostalgia is another kind of insulation. The debate will continue long after you're gone. Did soldiers really sing this much? Or are chroniclers exaggerating for colour? Archaeologists can dig up pots and weapons, but no one can exhume a melody. Still, as you lie here, letting the chorus wash over you, you know it doesn't matter. Even if the record is silent, the truth is written in breath. Men always sing when they are cold, because silence is worse. The ballad trails off, voices dropping into murmurs, then snores. The warmth it left lingers like embers, glowing in the dark. You curl into your cloak again, straw pricking your back, boots stiff against your feet, but you feel steadier than before. The night hasn't grown warmer, but your heart has. And so you drift back into shallow sleep, the last notes still humming in your head, carrying you toward dreams where the cold cannot follow. The song has faded into silence, replaced by the steady crackle of men shifting in their straw. You roll to one side, your nose pressed against the damp canvas, and catch a faint herbal scent. At first you think it's just smoke drifting from outside, but then you notice stalks and leaves tucked beneath the bedding. One soldier nearby pulls a handful from his cloak sage, dried and brittle, and crushes it in his fingers before scattering it under his mat. The smell sharpens, earthy and bitter, cutting through the musk of wool and sweat. It dawns on you. Some men stuffed their bedding with herbs, believing it would ward off illness and keep vermin at bay. Chroniclers occasionally mention sage, juniper, or even garlic being scattered beneath straw. That's a genuine practice from the period, born partly of medical theory, partly of superstition. Herbs were thought to purify air, repel fleas, and keep the body's humours balanced. Whether or not it truly worked, it gave men a sense of protection, something precious when survival was never guaranteed. You reach down and pick up a stalk yourself, sniffing its sharp scent. It tingles in your nose, almost refreshing compared to the sour stink of wet wool. A soldier mutters that juniper smoke drives away sickness. Another swears that garlic under the straw keeps lungs strong. You can't help but smile at the mixture of conviction and desperation. And here's one of those curious practices that borders on the absurd. Some armies apparently burned bundles of herbs inside the tent, filling the air with smoke so thick men coughed themselves to tears. The belief was that disease lingered in foul air, and if you drove out the stink with clean smoke, you drove out sickness too. You imagine it now, half a dozen men hacking, eyes streaming, the tent thick with sage fumes, and you laugh quietly. Maybe it kept plague at bay, or maybe it just made everyone too dizzy to notice the cold. Modern scholars still wrangle over the question of how common these herbal measures really were. Some suggest they were widespread, drawing on local village remedies adapted to camp life. Others argue that they were luxuries, possible only when an army lingered near fertile countryside. The archaeological record leaves hints: charred juniper twigs found in old fire pits, garlic bulbs preserved in refuse heaps, but the debate about their true purpose endures. Were they medicine or simply flavor for rations? The tent fills gradually with the mixed scents: sage sharp and bitter, garlic pungent and heavy, straw sweet but decaying. It is a strange perfume, but it masks the stench of damp boots and unwashed bodies. You find yourself oddly comforted, as though the herbs really are pushing the cold back a little. Your chest feels lighter, your breath steadier. Perhaps the mind needs ritual more than the body needs proof. A soldier across from you begins telling a story of a camp in Germany where men stuffed lavender into their bedding, claiming it soothed dreams and kept lice away. Another scoffs, saying lavender is for ladies' chambers, not soldiers' tents. The argument sparks laughter, and soon half the tent is debating which herb is strongest against the cold. It is not a scholarly debate, it is a chorus of tired men clinging to any hope, but it feels just as important. You run your fingers through the straw beneath you, feeling the brittle stalks and the unexpected crunch of garlic skins mixed in. It is odd, almost comic, but also strangely reassuring. Even here, in the mud of war, men reach for plants, for the familiar wisdom of fields and kitchens. The same herbs their mothers tucked into cupboards now lie beneath their heads, fighting frost and fear. The smells grow stronger as the night wears on. The herbs mingle with smoke from a brazier, creating a haze that blurs your senses. You feel drowsy, lulled not just by exhaustion but by the faint suggestion that you are protected. Whether or not the herbs truly heal, they soothe the mind, and sometimes that is enough to keep the body alive. You close your eyes, inhaling the earthy tang. The cold still claws at your feet, your cloak still itches, but your mind drifts easier. Perhaps you will wake with lice crawling, or perhaps the garlic will chase them off. Perhaps the sage smoke will ease your lungs, or perhaps it will only make you cough. You do not know, and you do not care. All that matters is that you feel a little safer, a little warmer, a little less alone. The herbal scent lingers faintly, but it does little to distract you from another reality of life in the tent. You scratch your arm, then your thigh, and realize the itching has returned with a vengeance. It is not the straw, it is not the wool, it is the living, crawling company that thrives where warmth and bodies press together. Lice, fleas, vermin, that love soldiers as much as frost hates them. It is a plain truth of medieval life. Vermin were constant companions in military camps. Chronicles describe men scratching themselves raw, garments crawling with lice, and straw bedding alive with fleas. No one escaped it. Nobles and peasants alike carried the same biting burden, though some disguised it better with perfumes or frequent changes of linen. You feel it now, the endless tickle across your scalp, the phantom crawling down your back. No amount of cloaks or furs can keep them away. A soldier beside you mutters curses, tugging at his tunic and shaking it violently. Another digs at his beard until flakes of skin scatter onto the straw. A third smacks his thigh, triumphant at crushing some invisible parasite. The tent becomes a hive of scratching and swearing, each man waging his private war against an enemy too small to see. And here's a strange, darkly comic note from the records. Some soldiers swore that vermin kept them warm. The idea was that lice and fleas fed on blood, but in return their constant movement created a kind of heat. One chronicler mocked the claim, saying it was fire that burns only in torment, but you can imagine desperate men convincing themselves of anything. The notion is grotesque, yet you almost laugh. It is the ultimate irony that suffering might be reframed as insulation. Scholars disagree on whether vermin outbreaks worsened in winter or summer. Some argue the layers of cloaks, furs, and unwashed bedding in cold months created the perfect breeding ground. Others point out that heat and filth in summer camps were just as bad, perhaps worse. The debate has no firm answer, since lice leave little archaeological trace beyond anecdote. Still, the arguments rage in journals and books, while here in the tent the proof scratches at your skin relentlessly. The smell of the tent seems heavier now, tinged with the musky odor of sweat-soaked wool that never dries, the sour tang of damp straw, and the faint metallic whiff of blood scratched raw from skin. You wrinkle your nose, but know there's no escaping it. Cleanliness is a luxury of bathhouses and monasteries, not siege lines and muddy fields. Someone mutters a story about a captain in Flanders who shaved his entire body to rid himself of lice. His men laughed until they saw him sleeping more peacefully than anyone else. Another claims boiling clothes in vinegar drove the pests away, though where vinegar would be found in such quantities remains a mystery. The tent erupts in debate, half advice, half mockery, as though banter itself might kill the fleas. You shift again, tugging your cloak tighter, trying to ignore the itch, but it gnaws at your sanity, more cruel in some ways than the frost. Cold makes you numb, but vermin keep you awake. You sigh, realizing that war has no mercy, no matter the scale. One moment you face arrows and steel, the next you fight creatures smaller than a fingernail. Both can undo you in their own ways. You scratch at your scalp again, flakes falling onto your cloak, and wonder how many men have fallen sick, not from swords but from the fevers spread by these parasites. Typhus, trench fevers, nameless chills, diseases carried silently by the very things that crawl under your tunic right now. You shiver, and not from cold. The irony, of course, is that lice thrive where men huddle together for warmth. The very act that saves your life invites infestation. It is a cruel exchange. You live another night, but you live itchy, sore, and restless. Survival is rarely clean, rarely noble. You close your eyes, scratching less, resigning yourself to their presence. Perhaps the soldier was right in some twisted way. The vermin are another kind of company, proof you are alive enough to feed them. You let the thought settle, bitter as it is, and drift towards sleep with the scratching still in your ears. The scratching never really stops. It fades when exhaustion overtakes you, only to flare again when you roll over. Yet by now you've grown almost numb to it, the way a soldier grows numb to the weight of his sword. You shift in the straw, trying to ignore the itch, and your eye catches a flicker at the far end of the tent. A soldier has spread something bright across his bedding. You blink in disbelief. It is silk. That's one of those realities that never fails to sting. Armies looted not only food and straw, but also fine cloth. Tapestries stripped from manor walls, embroidered hangings from churches, bolts of velvet stolen from merchants, all found new life as insulation in tents. What once displayed wealth or holiness now sagged under mud and frost, pressed into service by men desperate for warmth. Chroniclers frequently noted such thefts, half with disgust, half with awe at the ingenuity. You crawl closer and run your fingers over the edge of the fabric. Even in the dim light you can tell it was once magnificent, dyed deep crimson, threads glimmering faintly. Now it is smeared with dirt, its edges frayed. The man lying on it grins at your envy. Keeps the frost off better than straw, he boasts. You want to argue, but your hand lingers on the cloth. It is smoother than anything in your own tent, a taste of luxury amid misery. And here's a curious twist. There are tales of soldiers wrapping themselves in stolen altar cloths, the very fabric that once draped over sacred chalices. Imagine sleeping under the embroidered figure of a saint, not out of reverence, but because the gold thread holds heat. One chronicler even scolded troops for wiping their boots on silk banners stolen from a cathedral. You can almost hear the scandalized gasp of monks, but for soldiers, warmth outweighed sacrilege. Modern researchers disagree on just how widespread this practice was. Some argue that colorful accounts of looted silks were exaggerations, written to condemn armies for impiety. Others counter that inventories after campaigns often list tapestries and cloth as spoils, proof they were taken in large quantities. Excavations of old campsites occasionally reveal shreds of dyed threads, though whether they came from fine hangings or simple garments is unclear. The debate continues, caught between moral outrage and practical need. The tent fills with murmurs as men boast about what they've stolen. One says he sleeps on a tapestry that once showed angels, now half burned by sparks from a brazier. Another claims his cloak lining was cut from a noblewoman's gown, though no one believes him. The air hums with jealousy and laughter. You can almost forget the cold as men argue over whose stolen prize is warmest. The smell in the tent grows heavier with each breath. Smoke lingers from the brazier, mingling with wool, sweat, and now the faint mustiness of old cloth dragged from damp houses. There's even a whiff of beeswax, perhaps clinging to a church banner that once hung beside candles. It is a strange perfume, half sacred, half profane, reminding you that war has no respect for boundaries. You roll back to your place on the straw and close your eyes, picturing the tapestry as it once was, hanging in a hall, gleaming in torchlight, admired by noble eyes. Now it is crushed under the weight of soldiers, smothered in mud and breath. The transformation is jarring, but perhaps this is the true fate of all finery in war, to be repurposed, stripped of beauty, reduced to survival. One soldier nearby mutters that the saints will curse you for stealing their cloth. Another scoffs, saying warmth is blessing enough. The tent erupts into another debate, half theological, half practical. You smile faintly, realizing that even amid frost, men still find energy to argue about heaven and hell. Maybe that too is a kind of warmth. The silk gleams faintly as the brazier's glow catches it, like a dying ember refusing to go dark. You curl tighter into your cloak, straw scratching your back, and wonder what it would feel like to lie on such softness. Then you sigh, reminding yourself that silk cannot keep a man alive by itself. It is still just cloth, still vulnerable to damp and frost. In the end, all that matters is waking when dawn comes. And so you turn away from the gleam, muttering a prayer that your coarse wool will be enough. Luxury may soften the night, but endurance is what carries you to morning. The gleam of stolen silk fades as you turn back into your own cocoon of damp wool. For a moment, you close your eyes and try to surrender to sleep again, but a murmur of voices breaks the stillness. Not the rowdy chorus of song, nor the low cadence of prayer. This is softer, gentler, almost intimate. You realize the voices belong not just to soldiers. There are women here too, moving between tents, whispering, tending, and keeping a different kind of warmth alive. It's a part of army life less celebrated in the chronicles, but well known nonetheless. The presence of camp followers, women, wives, lovers, laundresses, cooks, or sometimes simply survivors, clinging to the army for protection, traveled with medieval hosts. They carried burdens, patched torn tents, mended cloaks, and sometimes even tended fires through the night. Without them, many armies would have frozen faster, starved sooner, and collapsed under the weight of cold. You open your eyes wider and watch as one woman stoops to adjust the tent flap, tucking straw into the gap to block the draft. Another sets down a small pot near the brazier, its thin steam carrying the faint smell of broth. The men inside stir, some murmuring thanks, others too exhausted to do more than grunt. You feel the air grow a little warmer, not because the pot holds much, but because someone cares enough to stir it. And then comes one of those curious details whispered in stories. Some women slept alongside soldiers not just for companionship, but to share body heat. It was practical as much as emotional. A warm body beside you could mean the difference between waking stiff or not waking at all. Chroniclers sometimes sneered at this, calling it immorality, but you can hear the truth in the sighs of men curling closer under cloaks. In frost, virtue is a luxury, warmth a necessity. Historians disagree about the numbers. Some suggest only small groups of women accompanied armies, tolerated at the margins of camp. Others point to evidence that whole communities, wives, children, even elderly kin, moved with forces across Europe, creating a shadow society behind the lines. Excavations of camp remains often reveal domestic items, spindles, children's toys that hint the army's footprint was wider than swords and shields alone. The reality was likely a shifting balance, swelling with each campaign. You lie back, listening to the faint sounds, the scrape of a spoon against a pot, the murmur of a lullaby hummed by a woman to a child tucked in the corner of the tent. The air smells faintly sweeter, as if the herbs from earlier have mixed with broth, masking the rankness for a while. You breathe deeply, grateful. War is misery, but this presence softens its edges. A soldier nearby cracks a joke, saying the women are braver than the men, for they face the same cold without armor or weapons. Laughter follows, but it is respectful laughter, tinged with truth. You imagine the courage it takes to march with an army, to face frost, hunger, and danger without promise of pay or protection. You feel a flicker of admiration in your chest, warming you better than the brazier. Another man tells a story of a laundress who saved her husband by pulling him back from a frozen ditch after a march. He had collapsed, half dead, but her shouting roused comrades to drag him back to camp. Without her, he would have been another body stiff with frost. You picture her stubborn face, refusing to let winter win. Such stories rarely make it into the chronicles, but in the tents they live on, passed like charms against despair. The scholars still argue, were these women tolerated reluctantly or embraced as vital? Some claim commanders despised their presence, fearing distraction. Others note that official records sometimes list rations allocated to them, proof they were recognized, even counted. The disagreement lingers, but in this moment you don't need parchment evidence. You can hear them here, stirring pots, patching cloaks, humming softly. Their survival work is woven into the night as tightly as any cloak. The cold still gnaws, but it feels less monstrous when someone adjusts the flap to keep the wind out. You curl tighter into your cloak, your cheek against straw, and let the murmurs wash over you. You can almost believe you are back home, listening to familiar voices in the next room, safe under a roof rather than canvas. That illusion eases the ache in your bones more than any stolen fur. Sleep comes easier with that comfort in your ears. You breathe slowly, letting the smells of broth and herbs mix with the musk of the tent. The frost outside may still sharpen its teeth, but inside, for a little while, warmth is shared not only by body heat and braziers, but by hands that mend, voices that soothe, and the simple, stubborn presence of women who refuse to stay behind. The murmurs of the women fade as exhaustion overtakes the tent again. You roll onto your back, staring at the faint frost crystals spidering across the canvas above you. In the dim glow of embers, the uneven snoring of your companions seems almost rhythmic. Yet one sound cuts through the grumble of a night, muffled but distinct, drifting from the larger pavilion nearby. His voice carries authority even in complaint, and it draws bitter chuckles from the men around you. It is well attested in sources. The voices of rank told a different story of the cold. Knights and noble officers had larger tents, rugs, servants, and richer bedding, yet they still complained loudly about their hardships. Meanwhile, peasants and foot soldiers packed together like salted fish endured with fewer words, their silence born of necessity. Chroniclers themselves often recorded the grievances of lords, for those were the voices worth writing down, while the common man's mutters rarely reached parchment. But here, in the cramped dark, you hear both. The knight curses his stiff joints, declaring that the damp ruined his armor straps. A soldier beside you snorts, muttering that he would gladly trade frostbitten toes for ruined straps. Another says mockingly, "Hark, the lords freeze differently than us." The laughter is low, muffled under cloaks, but it spreads quickly. Humor is rebellion, and in the cold, rebellion keeps you warm. And there's a curious detail you can't help but notice. Even knights, for all their privilege, sometimes admitted envy of their men. Chronicles hint that nobles, cocooned alone in vast pavilions, froze more than the huddled masses. The common soldier's misery was shared, and with sharing came warmth. A knight wrapped in fur on a feather bed might look enviable, but when the fire died and the canvas shook, loneliness was a colder companion than straw. Scholars continue to debate the true gulf between noble and peasant comfort in camp. Some argue the disparity was extreme, that commanders lived almost luxuriously compared to their men. Others caution that the differences, while real, have been exaggerated by storytellers eager to paint nobles as decadent and selfish. The truth likely shifts with time and place. A duke in Burgundy might sleep on cushions, while a minor knight in Scotland froze much the same as his men. The evidence is scattered, and so the arguments linger. The smells differ too. From the noble pavilion comes the faint whiff of resin and spiced wine, drifting on the draught. In your tent, it is smoke, sweat, and garlic-stuffed straw. You wrinkle your nose, but smile faintly. Scents tell the story of class as much as banners or coats of arms. One of your companions whispers that he once saw a baron bring a portable brazier carved with silver, glowing like a hearth fit for a king. Another replies with a tale of a knight who demanded heated stones wrapped in velvet, only for them to burn holes in the cloth. The laughter that follows is sharp and satisfied. The more ridiculous the noble complaints, the more warmth the common men seem to find in mocking them. You shift under your cloak, pressing closer to the soldier at your side, and wonder how much truth lies in these stories. Perhaps exaggeration fuels resentment. Perhaps the truth is simpler, that every man, noble or peasant, groans under the frost in his own way. Still, the complaints of knights sting more because they are heard more. To lie freezing in straw and hear your lord bemoan damp boots is insult piled atop misery. The tent grows quiet again, though now and then a muttered joke flares up, like sparks from a dying fire. You close your eyes, still tasting the bitterness of class in the air. Survival may bind all soldiers together, but comfort divides them, and envy sharpens even as frost numbs. And yet, there is a strange, humbling truth you cannot ignore. When dawn comes, knight and peasant alike will rise stiff, scrape ice from their cloaks, and march side by side. Rank may divide comforts, but it does not spare anyone from the frost. The cold is mercilessly democratic. With that thought, you tug your cloak tighter and let sleep claim you again. Your last awareness, the contrast between muffled, noble complaints and the rough silence of men who simply endure. You wake to a strange noise, not coughing, not muttering, not even the wind whining through the seams of canvas. It's chewing, soft, steady, almost desperate. You turn your head and catch the shape of a soldier crouched low, gnawing on something by the dim glow of embers. At first you think it's bread, but then you see the glint of metal. He's scraping a bit of dried meat from his dagger blade. The smell of grease drifts faintly across the straw, and your stomach tightens with envy. Food, always food. It is written plainly across every record of winter campaigning. The cold could be endured if bellies were filled, but hunger made frost unbearable. Armies that ran short on rations saw morale collapse, desertion spike, and illness spread faster than any enemy arrow. It was not just fire and furs that kept men alive, but the heat of food in their bellies. You roll onto your side and think of your last meal. Thin gruel, half frozen by the time it reached the bowl. It warmed your throat for a minute before leaving you hungrier than before. The man chewing now has something richer, hard sausage perhaps, or fat rendered into a lump. You can almost taste it. The salt, the faint tang of smoke. And here comes one of those peculiar details passed down in whispers. Soldiers sometimes slipped hot stones into their pots, both to heat the gruel and to stretch it. Stones boiled with scraps of meat would release minerals and make the liquid thicker. Whether it truly nourished them is doubtful, but the illusion of a fuller meal made it easier to close one's eyes against the cold. You smile grimly at the image. Dozens of men hunched over bowls filled half with soup, half with river pebbles. Historians debate how much nutrition soldiers really had during sieges and winter marches. Some insist supplies were carefully managed, citing records of grain and salted pork distributed in quotas. Others argue that corruption, theft, and sheer logistical chaos left men starving more often than not. Archaeology shows both. Animal bones gnawed to splinters in some camps, and discarded heaps of grain in others. The truth, as ever, seems uneven. In your tent, the debate doesn't matter. The proof is in your belly, which growls loudly enough to make the men nearby chuckle. One tosses you a crust of bread so hard it could be mistaken for stone. You gnaw at it anyway, grateful for the faint crunch and the salty aftertaste. Hunger makes even misery taste good. The smells of the tent shift as more men pull out scraps, dried peas, strips of pork fat, chunks of onion smuggled from a village. The mingled scents fill the air, sour but comforting, masking the stink of wool and damp. For a moment, the tent feels less like a tomb and more like a kitchen. One soldier mutters a story about a campaign in the Baltic where men roasted rats over a brazier, insisting the meat kept them warmer than any cloak. Another claims he once ate boiled horsehide softened until it resembled leather soup. The tent erupts in groans and laughter, yet beneath the jokes lies truth. Hunger drove men to anything. You lick crumbs from your fingers and realize how deeply food shapes survival. A full belly means better sleep, even on damp straw. Hunger gnaws worse than frost, rattling you awake in endless shivers. A soldier who eats, however poorly, has a chance at dreams. A starving one stares at the canvas ceiling all night, listening to his bones creak. The debate among scholars echoes faintly in your thoughts. Was food truly enough to fight the cold, or was it only a short reprieve? Some point to the high-calorie needs of marching in winter, claiming rations could never keep up. Others argue that preserved meat, cheese, and grain when supplies held gave armies surprising resilience. No single conclusion satisfies, but as you scrape the last crumb from your cloak, you know one thing for certain. Tonight, your body is grateful for even this hard crust. The tent falls quieter as men finish chewing, bellies filled, even barely. Sighs replace groans. You close your eyes, feeling the faint warmth spread from stomach to limbs. It is not much, but it is enough to coax drowsiness. You think of home, of stews bubbling over hearths, of bread fresh from the oven, of meat cooked until juices ran. Then you open your eyes to the dim, smoky air of the tent and remind yourself, war offers no feast, only survival. You curl into your cloak, straw rustling, boots stiff against your shins, and let the comfort of food, meager though it is, carry you toward uneasy sleep. Your belly holds just enough food to take the edge off, but sleep still won't come easy. The tent feels damp, the air heavy with moisture, and every draught cuts sharper than the last. You curl tighter, trying to tuck your knees under your chin, but it is never enough. The body is stubborn when warmth fades. No position feels right. You shift onto your side, then your back, then your stomach, only to find each angle worse than the last. It's one of those things rarely glorified in chronicles but admitted between the lines. Soldiers spent much of the night simply tossing, adjusting, never quite finding rest. The cold made the body its own enemy. Muscles cramped, joints stiffened, and sleep arrived in broken fragments rather than long stretches. Some letters from the period even note that exhaustion on the battlefield was as much from poor nights as from marching by day. You glance around the tent and see others faring no better. One man snores fitfully, jerking awake as though startled. Another sits upright, cloak wrapped tightly, muttering that lying down makes him colder. A third has pressed himself against the tent wall, his breath freezing the canvas in tiny patterns of ice. Each man fights his own losing battle against discomfort. And then you remember one of those odd habits soldiers sometimes resorted to, sleeping in strange, curled positions copied from animals. Some huddled like dogs, knees drawn under chest, arms wrapped tight. Others lay face down, cloaks pulled completely over their heads, making themselves into lumps of cloth. Chroniclers occasionally mocked them for sleeping like beasts, but imitation often meant survival. If a dog knew how to conserve warmth, why shouldn't a man? Scholars remain divided on how conscious these positions were. Some argue they were instinctive, the body curling naturally against frost. Others suggest soldiers deliberately adopted them, even teaching one another which shapes trapped the most heat. The absence of detailed descriptions makes certainty elusive, but the logic is undeniable. Every limb tucked in meant less heat lost. You roll onto your side again, curling yourself tighter, chin tucked against your chest. The posture feels strange, but slowly, faintly, warmth gathers around your torso. Your legs still ache, your toes still freeze, but the shivering slows. You breathe shallowly, afraid that deep breaths will release what little heat you've hoarded. The tent groans again in the wind, and the straw beneath you crunches with every shift. The smell of damp earth seeps up through it, mingling with wool and smoke. It is a heavy, oppressive scent, but strangely grounding. You imagine roots buried deep in soil, surviving storms, and you take comfort in the thought that you too might endure the night rooted in this discomfort. A soldier nearby whispers advice: keep your arms tight, don't stretch them. Cold steals faster from open limbs. Another replies, half asleep, I'll trade your advice for your cloak. The exchange sparks muffled laughter, tired but real. Even small jokes ease the endless shifting. You shut your eyes again, trying to let the rhythm of breathing guide you. Inhale, exhale, cloak pressed to face, boots locked against straw. The body resists, but the mind coaxes. Stillness, stillness, stillness. Sleep doesn't come as a wave but as a drip, gathering slowly until it weighs your eyelids down. Yet the night is never merciful. A draft slips in, brushing your neck like a knife. You jerk awake, cursing, and pull the cloak tighter. The shivers return instantly, undoing the progress of minutes. You groan, realizing this is the pattern. Half an hour of dozing, half an hour of shivering, repeated until dawn. The historians may write about battles, about banners, about noble speeches, but here in the tent the truth is plainer. War is not just fought with swords. It is fought with every position you can twist your body into, every scrap of warmth you can hoard, every breath you try not to waste. The struggle is not only against enemies, but against your own restless bones. You lie still once more, body curled like a hound, listening to the chorus of restless sleepers. The snoring, the coughing, the muttered curses, they weave together into a kind of lullaby, crude but steady. You let yourself drift with it, not to deep rest but to something closer to survival. And in this world, perhaps survival is sleep enough. You jolt awake, though you cannot tell why at first. The camp is hushed. The only sounds the restless shifting of men and the groan of canvas in the wind. Then you realize what stirred you. The air feels heavier, warmer, thicker with the presence of so many bodies pressed close. You draw in a breath, and it tastes damp, sour with sweat and smoke, but there is warmth in it nonetheless. It was a common tactic, though not one proudly sung of in poems. Soldiers huddled together, using their own bodies as fuel. No single cloak or fur could do what human heat could. A dozen men pressed side by side under shared blankets could hold off frost that would kill them alone. Chroniclers rarely lingered on it, but the reality seeps through in scattered notes about companies lying like swine or sharing skins to endure the night. You feel the truth of it as you shift closer to the man beside you, your knees knocking his, your shoulders touching. At first it is awkward. You are warriors, not kin, but the warmth seeps between you quickly, undeniable. Soon another presses in on your other side, and before long, the tent is a knot of bodies, tangled cloaks, and steady breathing. It is not comfortable, but it is survival. And here's a curious wrinkle from old stories. Some soldiers joked that the worst part of huddling wasn't the closeness but the morning after, when cloaks were stiff with frozen sweat where bodies had steamed together. Imagine peeling apart layers of men and cloth like thawing meat, each groaning as they separated. Disgusting, yes, but life rarely tastes sweet on the battlefield. Scholars remain uncertain how universal this practice was. Some argue it must have been routine. Basic physics demanded it. Others point out that cultural norms of modesty and masculinity may have made men resist it, at least in some armies. Still, archaeological evidence of wide communal shelters and large bedding pits hints strongly that many soldiers shared heat this way. The written record may be sparse, but the logic is too strong to deny. You let your head rest against the man beside you, his hair greasy, his breath foul, yet the warmth undeniable. You close your eyes and for a moment imagine you are back in your village, curled beside family on a winter's night. The illusion is fragile, but it soothes you. In the dark, the cold matters less than the rhythm of another chest rising and falling beside your own. The smell of so many bodies packed together is overwhelming. Wool damp with sweat, leather stiff with grease, smoke clinging to every fold. It is pungent, sour, almost unbearable. Yet you realize that in its own way, it is the smell of life. These odors are proof that blood still flows, hearts still beat, warmth still radiates. In this context, stench itself is reassurance. One soldier mutters a joke about pigs in a pen, and the tent erupts with soft chuckles. Another grumbles about being kicked in the shins by a restless comrade. A third sighs contentedly, declaring he hasn't felt this warm since he left home. Humor, complaint, and relief mingle together, weaving camaraderie into the night. You listen to the laughter fade, then to the slow chorus of snores. The warmth grows almost stifling, and you loosen your cloak slightly, a luxury unthinkable earlier. You marvel at the strange paradox. The very closeness that makes you itch, gag, and fume is the thing keeping you alive. The scholarly debate lingers faintly in your thoughts. Was this huddling purely pragmatic, or did it deepen bonds among soldiers? Some historians argue that shared hardship forged comradeship stronger than oaths. Others warn against romanticizing, reminding that resentment, theft, and violence often thrived in such close quarters. The truth likely contains both. You feel the press of elbows and knees, the grumble of a man's breath against your neck, and you know it is both comfort and annoyance at once. You shift again, feeling the straw crunch beneath your weight, and realize the warmth is steady now, less fragile than before. The cold still nips at your nose and toes, but the core of your body is wrapped in shared heat. For the first time in nights, you do not shiver uncontrollably. You sigh, sinking deeper into this crude embrace of survival. And as you drift, you cannot help but reflect. Armies may march under banners, fight for kings, pray to saints, but in the end, survival is simpler than all of that. It is bodies pressed together in the dark, hearts beating stubbornly against the frost, men becoming blankets for one another. It is not glorious, not noble, not clean, but it works. And in this world, that is all that matters. You stir again, though this time not from cold or itching or hunger, but from a sound that makes your whole body tense, the sudden blast of a horn outside. It is not the morning call. The sky is still dark, the tent still frozen with night. Men around you jolt upright, fumbling for cloaks and blades. For one terrifying moment, you imagine raiders, enemy scouts slipping into camp. Then, after a pause, you hear the familiar bark of an officer's voice. Not alarm, but routine. A night watch calling the change of guard. It reminds you of another truth of these camps. Men did not always sleep through the night. Guard rotations meant some had to stay awake, pacing the perimeter, stamping their feet to keep blood flowing, keeping eyes sharp for ambush. Inside the tents, men half slept, always alert for horns or shouts, knowing the night was never wholly safe. Cold was enemy enough, but fear of surprise attack meant rest was fragile at best. You slump back into your straw, heart still hammering. Around you, others grumble, cursing the officer for bellowing so loudly. But one man shrugs and mutters, Better noise than knives at our throats. He is right. You sigh, trying to settle again, though sleep now feels far away. And here's one of those odd, almost comical practices. Some soldiers took turns lying awake inside the tent, keeping the brazier alive or nudging others when they stopped breathing evenly. A crude kind of night watch within the shelter itself. Imagine trying to sleep while your comrade stares at you in the dark, waiting to prod you back to life if you stopped snoring. Unsettling, yes, but effective when frost killed silently. Scholars still disagree over how much sleep soldiers truly got. Some argue men collapsed into near comas from sheer exhaustion, sleeping through anything. Others insist accounts of vigilance, of men waking often to stoke fires or adjust cloaks, are closer to truth. Archaeology can't resolve it. Sleep leaves no bones, no artifacts. Only scraps of writing remain, and they rarely dwell on snoring. Yet lying here, startled awake by horns, you know rest was rarely whole. The smell of smoke drifts into the tent again, harsher now as guards outside stoke their fires against the dark. It mixes with the musk of wool and sweat until your throat stings. You cough, earning curses from the men beside you. Sleep broken by noise, discomfort, and irritation. This is the true rhythm of camp nights. One soldier grumbles about an ambush years ago when men were caught half asleep, armor scattered, tents ablaze. His voice trembles with memory. Another retorts that freezing to death in silence would be worse. The debate flares briefly, but exhaustion douses it quickly. Soon the tent is muttering, then dozing again, though with one ear cocked for the next horn. You pull your cloak tighter, dagger still at your side, and realize how much fear shapes the night. The frost claws at your skin, but it is the thought of sudden attack that keeps your mind restless. Even warmth cannot fully shield you when survival depends on vigilance. The historians who debate logistics, rations, or tents often overlook this. The mental war fought in the dark. Men slept, yes, but always with the weight of watchfulness pressing down. No rest was unbroken, no dream undisturbed. Even in exhaustion, you half expect to rise at any shout, ready to grab a weapon before you've shaken the sleep from your eyes. You roll onto your side again, boots pressing into straw, listening as the horn sounds once more in the distance. A guard shift, nothing more. The camp breathes unevenly, 1,000 men snoring, coughing, muttering in fractured unison. You close your eyes, forcing calm, telling yourself the night will pass without blades. And so you surrender again to that half-sleep unique to soldiers. Shallow, fractured, but enough. Enough to survive, if not to dream. Enough to endure until the pale line of dawn slices across the horizon. The horn call fades into memory, and for a while you lose yourself again in the shallow, fractured rhythm of soldiers' sleep. But when you next stir, it isn't the sound of guards or the bite of a draft that wakes you. It's a glow. Not fire, not brazier, but the faintest grey shimmer pressing against the canvas walls. Dawn. You sit up slowly, joints stiff, straw clinging to your cloak. Around you, men groan awake one by one. Some rub frost from their beards. Others stamp their boots to force feeling back into toes. The air inside the tent is sharp, heavy with smoke and sour breath, but outside it is sharper still. You push the flap aside, and the world greets you with steel. The field is coated in white. Tents sag under frost, ropes stiff as rods, horses steaming faintly in the pale light. And here lies the blunt truth. Surviving the night is only half the battle. The morning after is its own ordeal. Men rose groggy, half-frozen, aching, and were expected to march, fight, or dig trenches, as if the night had not gnawed their strength away. Chroniclers often note dawn scenes like this, armies staggering into formation with eyes still rimed in frost. You feel it in your bones now. How victory begins, not with courage, but with the stubborn act of standing up. You stamp your boots hard into the crust of snow. The shock jolts through your legs, painful but necessary. Around you, the ritual repeats. cursing, stamping, shaking out cloaks, brushing frost from canvas. These are the morning hymns of a winter camp, sung not with melody but with groans. And here's one of those peculiar details passed along in half-forgotten letters. Some men deliberately rubbed snow on their faces at dawn, claiming it woke the blood better than fire. You imagine the sting, the burn of cold against already raw skin, yet in a way, you understand it shocks you awake, forces breath back into your chest, pain as alarm clock, frost as reveille. Specialists continue to argue about just how functional soldiers really were after nights like these. Some argue fatigue crippled armies, making morning marches slow and clumsy. Others point out that necessity drove men forward regardless, that soldiers hardened quickly or died early. Diaries and chronicles give both pictures, units collapsing in exhaustion and others trudging onward as if immune. The truth, perhaps, is that every man balanced on that line between breaking and enduring. The smell of morning is no kinder than night. Smoke from rekindled fires mixes with manure, damp wool, and sour wine. Yet there is also a faint promise, the scent of porridge bubbling in iron pots, the hiss of water poured onto coals. Thin fare, but hot, and therefore golden. The men stir more eagerly at that smell than at any horn. You step outside and see the camp fully. Lines of tents rimed with frost. Men crouched over fires, women ladling broth, horses stamping their hooves. It is a picture both pitiful and defiant. Against the vast winter sky, every figure seems small, fragile, absurd, and yet every figure still breathes, still moves, still refuses to fall. That is the true victory, you think. Not banners or speeches, but this stubborn refusal to die in the night. A comrade claps you on the shoulder, his hand rough, his smile weary but real. "Another night done," he says simply. The words carry more weight than a sermon. Another night done. Another night survived. You look back at your tent, sagging, stinking, scratched with frost. You remember the hours inside, straw itching, boots bruising, cloaks scratching, vermin biting, breath freezing. You remember braziers glowing, stones cooling, songs rising, prayers muttered, laughter shared, envy simmering, warmth borrowed from beasts and bodies alike. You remember how many times you thought you could not last until dawn, and yet you did. This, you realize, was the essence of medieval war, as much as swords and sieges, a long, grinding battle against the night. Chroniclers may have written of valor on the field, but the truest test of endurance was here, in the dark, in the cold, with nothing but canvas, straw, and stubborn will. And as the pale sun climbs, its weak light washing the frost in silver, you let yourself breathe easier. Not because the day will be kind, it won't, but because you outlasted the night. Now, as the story settles, you can let the noise of the camp drift into the background. Picture the frost-rimmed canvas fading away, the groans of waking soldiers softening until they are little more than whispers carried on the wind. You've walked with them through the night, felt the prick of straw, the bite of frost, the scratch of vermin, the warmth of stolen cloaks and braziers. You've seen how survival rarely looks noble, how it depends on humor, superstition, companionship, and a stubborn will to see the morning. Let that imagery blur now, slow and gentle, like smoke rising from a fire until it disappears into the grey sky. Imagine the soldiers settling into a march, their shapes fading into distance, while the tent behind you collapses into silence. The night you endured with them becomes a memory, distant and harmless. Breathe slowly, deeply, and picture your own space now quieter, safer, warmer than any medieval camp. The harsh air of the tent softens into the gentle calm of your own room. The sting of frost melts into the comfort of your blanket. The restless mutters of men transform into the steady hush of your own breath. You don't need to stamp your feet or huddle for warmth. You don't need to fight for scraps of food or curse the wind. All of that belongs to another time, another place, long gone. You can simply rest, knowing you've walked through their world and left it behind. So close your eyes, let your body sink heavier, and allow the last fragments of imagery to dissolve. The soldiers fade, the frost melts, the campfire smoke vanishes, and you are left with only quiet. Quiet and rest. Quiet and sleep. Sweet dreams.